we watched them for like 3 weeks. Like 20 an hour, it seemed like.
Blasting.
Good morning. Let's get started. It's a little bit ahead of 9, so close enough, I think. Good to see you all here. My first announcement for the day is that this is Becky Sylvester Appreciation Day. I've designated that, just dictated it. Becky, as you know, is the person who prepares our minutes and does much more. Assembles our notebooks, looks after us, takes care of James. She has many roles and responsibilities. When she comes to the preparation of our minutes, a very important function, she finds it very difficult at times to hear when there are side conversations. So if you would be careful about not engaging in side conversations, that will appropriately honor and respect Becky. So please remember that. It is now 9 o'clock. Let's begin by identifying everyone in the room and start at the other end of the room, the north end, with Susan. Please your name and whatever else you'd like to throw in.
Susan, communications director. Hi.
Hi.
And you have little sticky notes. That's how you can pass notes to each other instead of chit chat. Just like in school.
Joe, Gilly controller.
Yes.
I'm Leanne Dennis, and I am actually. You want me to go with it?
Sure, we're gonna do introductions of our new recreation director. But go ahead.
Leanne Dennis, I'm new recreation director here and in town for a couple days, so I thought I'd pop in and say hi.
Hi.
Welcome.
Welcome.
I'm Kelly Allen. I'm the HR director, looking in after Leslie Knight. So big shoes to fill for a rather little lady.
Bob Stilson, board watchdog.
I sure hope the work watching. And then at the table,
Keith Caceres, assistant general manager.
sir.
This is from IT department.
Bill Burke, board director.
Clark Peterson, board.
Gerhard Beaman, treasurer.
Keith Mobley, board.
Mike Goethe, equally board. Mark Murray, secretary.
Paul Conklin, board member. Scott Gillies, board. James Lewis, general manager.
And before we get started, Scott reminded me that I was going to remind everybody else, turn off your phones, please.
Yes. Good. So much to remember. We are short one board member who called or sent me a text. Tony County has a client who is delaying him a bit. He will be coming a little bit late. So we have 8 of the 9 present. We have a quorum and we are ready to proceed with the board of directors work session for November 19, 2021. And as always, we start off with the owner's law. Do we have any owners who would wish to speak to us? Yes, Randy. Your name and address for Becky, please.
Randy Schneider, 660 Mountain Lane. And before I started my 2 items I'd like to say a thank you to the board and everybody else for, I got a nice Rude Awakenings coffee thing in the mail the other day. And I think it's a nice program you do for everybody who helps out. I mean, I can buy my own coffee, but thinking of remembering people, I know that the president probably signed like hundreds of those things. And I understand that's a burden too. So thank you all. My first item was a week ago Thursday, I was heading to our recycling center to recycle and drove by the office here and was shocked to see everybody here. So I barged in our general manager's office and said, why is everybody working on Veterans Day? And I found out that we don't have Veterans Day off like a lot of other state and federal and city governments. And I don't know if that's a collective bargaining agreement thing we did with them or what, but as one of the vets around here, I think it's kind of sad that we don't have that day off for our staff. So I don't know if there's a way to fix that. And if nothing else, I'd like to maybe under this table, if we have any vets on the staff, that the GM could at least maybe give them the afternoon or time off to go to any parades they want to do or whatever. My second item is our addresses. And we all know this who live here, and I don't know if it's ever been discussed before or worked on, but I live at 6 Dixie Mountain, but I can't get mail right now, no. I have this other address, 11810 or something, my tax lot address. And that works for taxes, but it doesn't work for shipping anything. So we all have this problem when we order online. If you don't know if it's coming postal service or UPS, you don't know which address to send it to. So I don't know if there's a way that we can fix so that for all of us to not have this problem. Because we all have this problem.
It's a big problem for fire. Big problem.
A lot of problem for everything.
For all of us.
I don't know.
Oh, it's the fire department.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Two different addresses.
Yeah.
James.
Okay, two things. One, the address that your 6 Dixie Mountain Lane comes from, it goes back to the original platting of your lot 6 in, whatever plat that is, whatever phase of Sun River. And that's what Sun River SROA has historically used to identify properties. Deschutes County, who is the official property address, they have their official property address coordinator. They issue that 5-digit number. So for mailing purposes, that's the official address. Those are forwarded to the post office. I don't know what the county does in terms of forwarding those to, say, UPS, FedEx. But anything having to do with mail, FedEx, deliveries, things like that, ends up going through the county property address coordinator. And that's your official address as far as the governmental entities and deliveries are concerned. Is that
FedEx doesn't deliver to that.
and again, I mean, that it's something, I hear you. We could we could write a letter to FedEx and say, hey, here's the addresses, use the county assigned address. But I know the county does that, so just passing that on.
Is there a way to talk to the county about them changing their numbers to 6 Trophy Lane or 6?
They just.
Their address system is part of a huge countywide addressing
I know
system.
that, but is it ever?
I will have that conversation with them.
My 2 cents, so I'm in some other city and I'm on Street A, and the city comes through and it connects A and Zebra Boulevard, and all of a sudden they change to Zebra Boulevard. They change that.
Yeah, they could change street names and
Right.
cause you to change your address and
Right.
everything.
They should be able, I would think they should go there.
And so I can have that conversation with them, but I will just tell you from years of working with on property addresses, that's how they do it. And I would not hold my breath to have them change it.
Yeah, the problem is much bigger than just FedEx. I mean, a lot of online sites use some kind of web service, I don't know where they get it, to pick up the addresses. And you can type in that county address and they will not recognize.
Yeah, you
it.
have to force them to do it. Better websites will have an option. Are you
Some of
sure you
them do
want to
have
use this
that.
one? You say, yes.
But you can't use the county address because it's not identified on our houses. And as a result, all the drivers have no idea which house they're
Yeah.
sending it to. You have to have the 6 or the 8 or the whatever for the drivers.
I solved mine. It only works if you use the post office, but my address is 1 McKenzie. And I just put 1 McKenzie number 4880, which is.
Oh, I do that, and I'm
And so
at the
everyone-
North, I don't have a
everything-
problem really, because I'm at the North Store, and at PNB, they take my,
Yeah. So I
Mail,
don't have any
FedEx.
problems.
and they even take my wine for me and hold it, right? So if you're at the North Store, it's not as big of an issue, but that seems like a wrong, everybody can't do that route.
Did you get my wine shipment?
You had a cab, right?
Listen, line.
It was really good. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah.
I hope that doesn't sound like a problem, but it sounds like.
And I'll talk to the property address coordinator in the county. But again, the requirement for the addresses really goes back to emergency services. So what I'll do on this end is I'll bring the fire chief and police chief into the conversation.
Well, and the last time I renewed my driver's license, they made me put both the county address and my mailing address on the license.
Yeah, I had for the new real ID,
Yep.
you take your property tax or something that has your insurance, something has a legal address on it, and they force you to put that on there. But anyone copies that down, they can't begin to mail anything to me. They didn't put both, they only put my 58038 number on it.
We had a couple of people come in while we were in the middle of that. Did you wish to speak to us during the owners forum?
Thank you.
Please identify yourself and your residence.
Thank you. My name's Ray Johnson. We're at 4 Muir Lane here in Sun River.
All right, welcome.
Thank you. I haven't been here for the last couple of meetings. I apologize for that. Our schedule hasn't allowed it. 3 things that we'd like to just ask for maybe an update on. Are we making progress in terms of trying to work with some of the bike rental companies to get more bikes and reflectors on bikes? We've continued during the summer and fall to, at dusk time, see, I talked to my neighbor the other night. He was driving, he was out late. He had a pretty bright light on, but he said he ran into a group of almost 20 people struggling around in the dark. Now, this is probably 6 weeks ago when it was a little warmer. So I hope we're making some progress on that, but it continues from our perspective to be an issue. I don't know if we can make, if we've reached out to Google to make progress on trying to direct bikes and pedestrians to our bikeways. Even in the last 4 to 6 weeks, we've seen groups of 3 to 5 people walking around circle 3, walking between circle 1 and 2. And the other day, we found a group of 3 or 4 people walking on the road near the North Store, where there's bike lanes not far away. So we see that as continuing to be a problem. And then finally, my 3rd item, I hope we're able to, now that Congress has passed funds for broadband, I hope we can establish our own fiber optic network here. I know that we're in conversations with Ben Broadband, but I would tell you, people who use Ben Broadband for some time, we're not fans of Ben Broadband. And I know whatever they're going to do, we're going to, one way or another, pay through increased rates, maybe pay dearly through increased rates. So those are my.
All right,
my
thank
comments.
you. If you will hang around, you'll hear a report soon from your heart on the work of the telecommunications task force.
Okay.
Bring you up to date on that issue. James, did you want to address?
Yeah, back in the spring, had conversations with the bike rental companies on a number of things, and one was to, talk to them about reflectors and lights, et cetera. But again, I mean, we don't have any authority to make them do that, so it's ongoing conversation. And then with regard to bikes and pedestrians on the roads and not on the pathways, we do a number of things throughout the year, whether it's on our maps, whether it's in the scene, whether, to inform people that pedestrians and bikes are only allowed on pathways, except in areas where we do not have a pathway adjacent to the road.
Right.
So between like circle 2 and 3. But again, later on our agenda today, we have a pathway master plan update. That's our plan has been updated, and so it'll be presentation to the board. But essentially, it identifies pathway segments that 2 of the reasons are safety and access, links that need to be constructed, and then kind of has the prioritization. And so those links where you're seeing people, those are identified as high priority for us to build and construct. Can't say it's going to be done first thing next year, but there was a plan to do those, and it's prioritized.
Okay.
So that's what we do, but ultimately at the end of the day, people are going to do what they do. So as much as we prod them. But yes, it's high priority because they're getting busier and busier every year. So Sun River is, so we're trying to direct people. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for coming in. All right. So it was the owner's forum. James, did you want to say more?
I do.
Yes,
Introduce, I think, well, 2 people in our board, in our staff. Kelly Allen, I'm going to introduce. Kelly's been here for 5 years. You've probably seen Kelly around, worked for SRA for 5 years in our accounting department, but also worked with Leslie on human resources issues. And so when Leslie announced her retirement, we appointed Kelly as the new HR director. So last month. You gave a good send off to Leslie. So Leslie's now gone and Kelly has taken over. So she is all things human resources now. And realized how busy it is. And it is big shoes to fill for Leslie, but you are
A
doing
very
a great
busy
job.
lady. She works in very big shoes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So wanted to introduce Kelly to you, and that's who we'll be working with on all HR issues. And then Leanne Dennis. Leanne Dennis is our new recreation director to start, I keep saying July 3rd, but it's January 3rd.
Thank goodness.
January 3rd, she will start. Currently, right now, living south of the Bay Area. But you had been here before, going back 10 years ago. So Leanne used to work for SROA and left for her husband's job opportunity and now is coming back. So I will stop there and let either one of you say anything more that you would like to say to the board about your position. Pete? Put you on the spot.
Well, let me see here. Yeah, I've enjoyed my time here with SROA very, very much. It's a fabulous place to work. There's a fabulous set of employees to work with, and they feel a person have a great sense of integrity, and they're just brilliant people to be around. And so much of that is made possible because they have a board of directors that supports them in what they do every day. So please know that even though we don't see you every day, we do appreciate your support. And so I look forward to spending a lot more time with SROA and trying to fill those vacancies.
Yeah, so what she said. No, I mean, honestly, that's the truth there, right? I was here 10 years ago. I helped get Shark built and went on all the road shows, if you all remember that long ago history. And then when we were cleared to open, I moved down to the Bay Area and have been there since. I work in the same field, hospitality / recreation, swim, tennis, and fitness club type thing. Member owned, nonprofit, etc. So, but super excited to come back and again, work with a lot of the same people. It's amazing to have this opportunity and I look forward to it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to have you back.
Yeah, well, welcome aboard.
Staying
Welcome back.
on. Yes. Very good. All right. Are we ready to move into the agenda?
Yes.
Indeed. All right. Keith, you are first up. Commission's model work group update.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The board members will look in the back of their section 3 behind the GM report. You'll find the mission model work group update. I'll give you all a second to get there. So the first page you'll see is charts showing member preference passes issued per month. And as you can see on the top chart there, you'll see that starting the months of July, August through September, October, and you'll see here in November next month is that basically this is towards the end of the selling season. So we have we've hit our peak during the summer, and now we're trailing down, and then we're basically right on the heels of ending this season, ramping back up for the enrollment season for 2022, starting December 15th. So we're right now in the process of transitioning to the new rates for next year once the board approves the budget. So right now it's a very busy time for going forward, but there's not a lot of activity for the current year in regards to member preference.
Are
Cards issued
those cards are good through
January 31st of 2022.
2022. Are they
Correct.
prorated or are they sold at full?
They're prorated if you purchase your home after June 1st, and you have to. They don't become prorated until after Labor Day.
Okay.
If you pick them up after Labor Day, they're $27.50 versus $55.
Okay.
Correct.
All right.
But if you owned your home the full year, they still pay 55.
Correct.
Right.
Exactly. Yes. And then income per month, you can see that translates to the number of cards issued. Obviously, that goes down, and November will probably be less than October because unless for some reason there would be no reason because unless you want to try to get to the Thanksgiving holiday. If you were only here for Thanksgiving holiday, you may pick up a few cards in November. Otherwise, you would probably wait till December 14th. That'll get you through Christmas and then all the way through the following year. So we don't really see many membership sales in November. We just wanted to throw that out there ahead of time. And if you'll look on the next page, the pie chart, you'll see here that still our member preference renew is by far the largest category in revenue that we receive. But member preference new this year was very high and also extended family renew and new. So those categories have dominated this pie chart in our overall revenue for the member preference cards themselves. Number of passes issued, you can see there, we've issued more passes this year than we have going back. I'm showing 2018 the chart here, but actually going back to 2016, this is the highest we've had in regards to number of cards issued.
So I have to ask a question
Yes.
about 2022.
Yes.
What's the target?
For you, I know it's 10,000, right?
Well, I thought I'd give you an opportunity to say yourself.
So we would love to exceed where we are this year. And I think because there'll be year 2 of the member pool, I think we have an opportunity to gain more there. Yes, we do have a pros right now in the fees for services to go from $55 to $60. So that could throw off a few members in regards to maybe I don't want to get the card, but there'll be more value added. And hopefully the goal with us being able to go from a 5 to 7 day week operation next year, the goal will be that people will be excited. They'll have more opportunity to use our recreation amenities. So I see this number going up as the goal for next year.
The budget is basically.
It's basically
where we're at
flat.
this year.
Right.
That's an
But,
opportunity.
you know, again, what I think we ought to do, and I always have to put in my plug here, because, you know, there's only 2 ways to solve the finance or budgeting equation. That's either to increase revenue or decrease expenses. Those are the only 2 ways, right? And so here's an opportunity. We are going to more days open. We are going to extended hours in the members pool and things like that. And we need to start marketing that now. And, you know, if we start marketing that now and make sure, you know, repeat that several times, owners will catch on, and we will be able to drive that number up, hopefully to 8,000 next year, maybe even higher. But it would be really good to keep pushing that to see how much more we can get out of that source of revenue.
What's the most we've ever had?
I think 7348 is peak.
Well, all the way in 2015, we had about 7,500. So we're right, but through 2016, this is the highest we've been since then. So we're right there on that cusp.
Yeah.
So to push 8,000 will be great if we can get there, but you're right about having to begin to promote it.
Yeah.
Otherwise you won't more than likely get there.
And I did lower the target, so.
That's good. We'll do all we can for once. I mean, our great thing is our membership team down in recreation, they do a really good job of getting things ready and set for communication purposes out to owners, but also out to the property management companies and those owners that use the RVO and Airbnb or Recreation Plus. So there's a lot of communication documents right now that are getting prepped and ready to be sent out once the board approves the budget.
Yeah, I think, you know, I mean, you know, as you showed in 2021, you got a lot of new, which is really, really important. And I think there still is more opportunity in the new category while retaining the reads.
I mean, right now, I mean, who knows with the crystal ball, but it doesn't look like 2022 real estate wise is gonna slack off too much.
Yeah.
So I think we'll see more homes transition over like they have in the last 3 years, which will add to that potential to gain new member preference card holders. And then, you know, this year, extended family was really strong, the strongest we've ever had for extended family. And I think part of that had to do with the fact that we did not offer gate admission. So the only way to get access was member preference for Recreation Plus, a guest of an owner, or if you were a family member to use extended family passes. So it'll be interesting next year to see if we still can reach that number of extended family if we do go back.
Right. Yeah, good point.
Yes.
The long-term renters,
Yes.
that number is shrinking and we expect it to continue to shrink.
Right.
How much potential is there to pick up what would have been long-term renters who might now fall into another category? Is it a large number?
No, it's a small number. I mean, overall, long-term renters have, it's the smallest piece, as you noted there, of our revenue pie. It's unique because the owner itself has to give up their rights to a member preference card for that year, while the long-term renter is leasing the space from the owner. So you have to be fully committed to not wanting to use your home at all. And so I think that number will, unless the real estate economy changes, then you may see that ratio shift. But right now, I think it's such a small number that overall doesn't really impact our revenues.
And that's defined as 6 months?
At least 6 months or more,
Okay.
yes.
Because I know people that would rent for 2 or 3 months. And in my mind, aside from our definition, that's kind of a long-term renter.
But it's not based on the documents we've had. And the reason is it's too much changed throughout the years. It's difficult because we require the owner to give up their rights. It's one of those things, it's difficult for them to go back and forth, like if they get a card, and we rent their home for 3 months and then get a card again. It's a lot of transactions that in the past have not bode well for us. And so that's why we've done the 6 months or more.
I might note too, the 6-month period is a point at which you do not pay transient room tax to the county. If you're in a house for 6 months, you don't have to pay that 6. So, yeah.
Then you'll see total income, 453,601. And as Joe mentioned before, the goal of next year, or at least the budget for 2022, is the income to be matched this year's income. Obviously, we'd love to extend beyond that. That's what we're targeting right now for 2022. The next 2 pages, you'll see are a little bit of kind of updates and charts. So these are just show that over 2021 year to date through October, we're 1,375 ahead of where we were in 2020. Once again, that's not a fantastic comparison to 2020. We were closed for portions of the year, and access was definitely limited more than it was in 2021. But what is important, if you look down at Recreation Plus program, so we had 842 homes so far this year. The reason you'll see that 79 there is highlighted in green is we did pick up 1 Recreation Plus pass for the month of October. So they basically wanted to access for the Thanksgiving holiday and the Christmas holiday coming up. The reason they purchased it. But you'll see they were minus 18 compared to 2020. However, that's an anomaly because if you look down in the bottom right, you'll see 812 was the adjusted total. So we're actually technically we're 30 above where we finished 2020 because of those that asked for a full refund last year. So, and then if you look at, you'll see here in a second, the next page, you'll see that we're at 115% of our budget. I'm sorry, 104% of our budget for Recreation Plus. So we exceeded the budget goal for the year as compared to 2020. And then at the very bottom of this, you can see the breakdown by bedrooms that we go through each month. At the very bottom, you'll note that it's still about a 2 to 1 ratio in reference to those that utilize property management companies versus those that go at it on their own and rent through VRBO or Airbnb. And that's been pretty consistent over the last 4 to 5 years. The next page shows just attendance notes for the month of October. And I did want to compare this with 2019 because it's important to see if we were open 7 days a week like we were in 2019. We had just over 5,800 people utilize the facility. This year being recreation swim 2 days a week and then lap swimming 5 days a week, we brought in 3,394 attendees for the month. You can see that's broken up by member preference. But once again, that's a big discrepancy between the two because 7-day week operations versus 2 is a big difference. So, but our goal, and that's part of the reason for 2 full-time head guards next year, is we want to, as soon as we can, bump back up to at least a 5-day to a 7-day schedule for operations next year. So these numbers will look a lot closer to what our 2019 numbers were. That's a goal going forward.
So is the goal from an hour perspective going to be equivalent to 2019?
It's going to be adjusted a little bit. We are looking at options. So that's why in the fees for services, you'll actually see a general admission rate for the entire day, but you'll also see session rates. So depending on which direction we end up going, because we're looking at potentially doing 2 4-hour sessions. So it'll be 8 hours of access to the pool facilities versus in the past we did 10 hours of access. But we realized we look at all our data sheets, the last hour to so of the day, the very first hour in the morning are not that busy. So it's one of those things where it's easier to schedule an 8-hour shift than try to schedule a 10-hour shift, and you have to rotate that to have more staff. So that makes it difficult as well too. So we're trying to balance that as much as possible.
Okay.
But we feel that 2 4-hour sessions, and most people don't stay for 4 hours at a time. So I think we're targeting the sweet spot for next year is our goal with that.
Okay.
But you can see overall, I mean, year to date through October 2019, we were at 235,000 compared to 93,000 with being a limited schedule this year. Guest passes issued through the month of October, 58,730. What that compares to, in which I don't have the chart here, it just shows you that if you look at years all the way back to 2015, we've issued more guest passes this year than we have all the way back to 2015. It's one, we're just higher number of member preference sales, but also we are more new properties took advantage of the cards this year, which triggers more guest passes. So basically what that means is because you only get 1 guest pass block of 20 per property. So if we had more people in the same house getting guest passes, you'd still only get 20, right? But if you have more homes participate, then it's more 20 passes going out as groups. So that's why that number is higher, which means a lot of these new property owners that came in this year more than likely took advantage of the member preference card option for them. And that's why that number is higher. And then guest passes at Shark 6,600, I'm sorry, redeemed at Shark 6,600, and those redeemed at North Pool through the end of September, or early September when we shut down the facility was 4,600, which was about 1,500 higher than we've ever had in the past. And that obviously attributed to the new facility that was built. And then if you look down our bottom revenues, you'll see here that member preference extended family long-term renter budget was 398,000, and we were at 457,000, so we're 115% of budget. And then Recreation Plus budget, which is over 2 million, just under 2 million, and we exceeded 2 million in revenue, so 104%. And then you'll see we brought in about 5,800 in gate revenue, which we didn't have any gate revenue planned. What that is revenue that's tied to guest passes. I'm sorry, just guests coming in with members at the member pool. And then also a few people that had their misplaced their cards that got reprinted as well. Any questions on these two charts?
No, I think, one comment though is that you guys did a great job this year. We got the revenue up on RPP and MPP. And I think that's was very, very helpful. And we just have to continue to push at it and see if we can kind of drive that a little bit higher.
All right. The questions? And we are ready to move on to the telecommunications task force update.
Okay, so there's, we've talked, I wasn't here last month, so I'm not sure what they was talking about last month. But
What about you?
So where we're at, again, the whole idea is we got this dual prong strategy. One prong of the strategy is build our own fiber to the home network. The other prong of the strategy is to get Ben Broadband to build a fiber to the home network here on Sun River. And we're making progress in both of those areas. Our objective is that we will have sufficient information early next year that we'll be able to make a decision through one mechanism or another, hopefully through some form of vote of the owners or some other vehicle. We haven't decided exactly what that's going to be yet. But in terms of the having a network built and owned by Sun River, with help from Mark Smith and Brad Olson and James Lewis, and I think Joe helped on this too. We issued an RFP to have an engineering company come in. The board approved the contract for the engineering company to go ahead and do the design work. They are proceeding with that. They have had several meetings with SROA personnel. They are putting together, and they have a commitment to have to us by the end of this month a bid package that will allow us to take that bid package and distribute it. In fact, they will help us distribute that bid package nationally. And we've also provided names of some local contractors that we've had conversations with. And so starting in December, that bid package will go out and we will start getting construction bids for building our own network. All right. We're hoping that by the end of the year, we will have those bids back. And then in early January, we'll be able to review the bids and we will have a clear idea of how much it will cost us to build our own network and the timing associated with building our own network.
You want to make any more comments before I ask questions?
Well, that's, I'm going to go to the other prong now.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the other prong is working with Ben Broadband, and we've had several discussions with Ben Broadband. In fact, we have got a proposed service agreement from Ben Broadband that kind of mimics what we have today. The existing agreement expires next July. There's an automatic 5-year extension on that. And so Ben Broadband will be our service provider for the next 5.5 years. That's a given, okay? Even if we build our own network, we're not going to be able to light it up and connect people, get people connected until the existing Ben Broadband agreement expires. So, but we have an agreement with Ben Broadband, a proposed agreement. We haven't signed off on it or anything like that. But we have an agreement that we have gone through several series of negotiations on. And it pretty much mimics what we have today. There are some other provisions that we have negotiated in there that would give us some level of advantage and ability to act ability for SROA to act as an agent for our owners in the event that they have got chronic issues that Ben Broadband fails to address, which is one of the things that came out of a lot of the surveys and town hall meetings that we've had with owners. We're also having discussions with Ben Broadband about an alternative agreement. That alternative agreement is what we call a bulk or MDU agreement. And in a bulk agreement, what would happen is that SROA would then become the customer of Ben Broadband. And we would provide, essentially, we would pay for every home in Sun River to have some level of service. And you can imagine that some level of service has, 100 megabits upstream, 100 megabits downstream of internet connectivity. And what we would do is we would, to pay for that, we would increase our homeowners assessment. So every home in Sun River would have an incremental assessment that would provide them with 100 megabits upstream, downstream internet service at their home. If they wanted, cable television channels, they can either use that internet connectivity to sign up for YouTube TV or some other Roku or one of the other video sources providers, or they could contract separately with Ben Broadband to continue to get TV service through Ben Broadband. If they wanted phone service, they could contract with Ben Broadband for that phone service, or they could go out and there are internet-based solutions that you can get a landline over the internet in your home for a relatively inexpensive amount. And so what we're asking Ben Broadband now is for the parameters around this this bulk agreement. Essentially, how many homes have to be included? What's the discount going to be? Because our objective in going through the bulk agreement is to see if we can get the cost structure of a Ben Broadband agreement down to a much lower level. And at the same time, give owners a lot more flexibility than what they have today. So those are the two approaches. Ben Broadband is having their meeting next week.
They were having it yesterday.
Yesterday. And so we should be hearing back from them next week. They were going to discuss this MDU agreement and come back to us with more specifics. And so, again, as I mentioned earlier, the objective is to have sufficient information in the early 2022 timeframe that we will then initiate our owners engagement process for town hall meetings, more scene articles, more email blasts, whatever, to give owners an understanding of what the various different options are. And then at some point in time, we will have a process for making a decision to go forward with one or the other. I don't know, Keith, James, or anybody wants to add anything else to that?
I think that hit all the nails on the head.
Is this MDU thing part of the 5-year extension, or would that be after the 5-year extension?
We don't know at this point in time. It's possible that what we could do is we could get Ben Broadband to say, okay, this starts today. We haven't asked that question, but it is possible.
If we were signing up with a new agreement, whether it's kind of more the standard agreement or this MDU agreement, if we were to engage in signing an agreement with them, it would negate the existing agreement. We would establish a new timeline within the new agreement.
Yeah, and so probably July timeframe.
All right, Clark.
My question would be, since Ben Broadband has the right to extend the contract for another 5 years, how helpful is it to get bids early next year and build a system? I assume it's not going to take 5 years to build, so we're going to be building a system that's going to sit idle for a couple of years.
Well, not quite, because one of the things that we're up against right now is some really constrained supply issues. And, with the infrastructure bill that recently passed Congress and was signed by President Biden, there is huge demand being placed on manufacturers of the components that go into a fiber to the home infrastructure. And so we anticipate that it will take some period of time. We don't know exactly how long, but we're hearing lead times that are going out to in excess of 1 to 2 years for a lot of the components. So it may take a fair bit. And then we have the option of sitting down with Ben Broadband if we decide to build our own network to figure out how we're going to exit the existing agreement. We have not approached that yet.
But even then broadband, the build out that they're saying for the timeline, in a new agreement for them to extend fiber to the home is they're looking at 2 to 3 years, probably on the 3-year end of it to do the full build out. So with getting materials and then doing the build out, we would be probably up on our own close to the end of that term.
So then related to that, we would also then we would start making payments to pay for all that before we are at a point to start charging our owners.
That is to be determined, but yes, there is that possibility. There are other ways of financing the construction upfront and then recovering that money later on.
There is also what's been called a flood of money
Yeah.
coming from Washington DC for broadband expansion. Whether or not Sun River would be eligible for any of that is an open question. It's quite clear, I think, though, that Deschutes County certainly could be, and there may be opportunities for us to cooperate with Deschutes County. And James, do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, it's actually through Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council. One thing, and if you remember, I'm on their board, so they came in our last meeting. They're creating what they're calling their broadband action team for Deschutes County, and COIC has gone to Deschutes County to seek funding through some of the funding that's available under the ARPA funds to work with the broadband action team and a consultant to do, number one, a needs analysis for all of Deschutes County. So what they will do is they will look at all areas within Deschutes County to determine what is served, what is underserved, what is unserved. And then the second would be to do a feasibility analysis to determine what do these areas need, what is the cost, what is the time frame. And so that work, being done for all of Deschutes County, I've spoken with the coordinator from COIC that's overseeing that project. We are part of Deschutes County. So it would be, and they're aware of the project, what Gerhard just described, what we're doing. So we would be working with them, and they're just beginning this process, COIC, this BAT team. So we could be working alongside with them to see how what we want to do fits within how Deschutes County is served as a whole, and what dollars are available for Deschutes County, and how we can be part of getting some of those dollars, again, for our own system.
Yeah, and Keith is working with state representatives also.
Yeah.
and making sure that they're aware of what we're trying to accomplish. And if there are funds available from a state perspective, that we are aware of how to access those funds.
But it's the Intergovernmental Council that's kind of pushing that rather than Deschutes County. They really weren't doing anything, but I think now we have a new county commissioner that this year that this is high awareness for him, that understands how important broadband is because we have lots of rural parts of Deschutes County for education, for medicine, for everything that we do nowadays. So I think that the awareness for Deschutes County is very high now.
And one of my personal interests is in seeing if we can get competition among providers. One of the problems in telecommunications historically has been that it's been a monopoly market. And we have paid dearly for the services that have been increasingly critical to our doing business, maintaining good health, and about every other thing you can think of. So if there is an opportunity in this process to encourage or develop competition, then I'm rather vocal about that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No problem at all.
Anything else on telecom? All right, moving on then to the budget discussion. 2022, fast approaching. James, you gonna lead this off?
Yeah, I'll give a brief introduction, just kind of the overview of the work we've done to create the budget that's before you now. And then I'm going to turn it over to Joe and our treasurer, Director Beenan. But I think Director Beenan summed it up here a minute ago. He said, we were looking at creating a balanced budget. Essentially, you can look at two things. There's money coming in and money going out. So I think in our work with the Finance Committee, we had 3 meetings with the Finance Committee on this. And we looked at all of the challenges we had in 2020 and 2021. We looked at the basics of economics. How do you minimize your expenses and maximize your revenue? again, with the understanding that we are a nonprofit and that we are charging fees and we are collecting fees and our maintenance fees to cover our services. We're not looking to make a profit. So with that in mind, all of our department heads, I want to thank them for doing a lot of work. They did a lot of red line work from the initial concept of our budget. And what they did is the work we did is to, how do we maintain the level of service that the owners in Sun River want with regard to our recreation facilities, which are high profile that many people use that are visitors and owners. And then how do we maintain what we have, our facilities? There's expenditure. If you own something, you have to maintain it. You have to change the oil in your car or it will not run after a certain period of time. So that's always a consideration for our expenditures. Also, there are new projects, things like a new tunnel, extending bike paths for safety and access reasons. But again, so all those are kind of the we have to do elements that you'll see within our budget. But also on the back end, I want to commend all of our employees because we go back to early 2020 when COVID kicked in, and that's always been a ever-changing game on a daily basis. We've had to react. I think Joe and I were talking, and it was a comment we got from one of our finance committee members that said, do we have a contingency plan for some of the revenue that we're hoping we get this year? I feel like the past 2 years have been one big contingency plan. Each day we've been given new challenges. And I think, when you see how we responded at, again, minimizing our expenditures, maximizing our revenue, but also continuing to provide the service that folks want. I think if you get 98% of the people are happy, you did a pretty good job. And so that's what we've experienced. So in that, we've had employees, we have a shortage of employees for a variety of reasons. We still have fewer employees than we had in early 2020 due to layoffs because we had closed facilities. This year, we're not proposing any new employees in this budget. We are shifting around some of the dollars. Again, you'll hear about permanent or full-time lifeguards versus some of our temporary or seasonal lifeguards. That's again to maximize the service that we can provide in our recreation facilities. And overall, the goal though, when we started out with our initial budget and our staff went to work with the red line, was to maintain or present a budget that lived within the 6% maximum that we can raise the maintenance fees per our consolidated plan. That's what you'll see today. We are not proposing any extra assessment. We are not proposing anything over and above. We are proposing the maximum 6%. I'll be very honest, and you will see that. But again, it's due to a lot of factors that I think all of you know, just various inflation factors, trying to find employees, higher wages. So again, we went to work, staff went to work. We're proposing the 6% maintenance fee increase, but we're bringing you a balanced budget. Stop there and turn it over to
Gary, do you want to say anything before?
No, I'll make comments during the process. I mean, let me say a couple things. First of all, thanks to James and Joe and the management team for the hard work they put in. And there was a lot of give and take between the finance committee and the management structure in developing this budget. And I think, both Joe and James and the rest of the management team responded very appropriately in the challenges that were given to them by the finance committee. So very much appreciate that. And, likewise, the finance committee has really dug deeply into this budget and understands it pretty much at a detailed level. And I think we have members who have come up with some very good suggestions this year. And so I think they really did contribute this time around.
Okay, so in front of you, we have a PowerPoint presentation, then there's a whole lot of backup behind it. So just kind of looking back a little bit, 2020, when COVID hits, we had a balanced budget, and because of all the revenues that we lost in closures for that year, we had about $800,000 operating loss that year. And then looking forward to 2021, for the first time, we had a budget that wasn't balanced, and we had a significant deficit projected, about $950,000. We did that knowing or hoping that our cash that we had in the reserves and potentially the recreation operating reserve fund we could use in order to stay within the 6% and kind of see what happened. And fortunately, 2021 is going to turn out, we're still going to have a deficit, but it's going to be much smaller than we anticipated or budgeted for the year. Lots of reasons for that, mostly MPPs and RPPs and the revenues being there, and then a lot of savings in labor and a lot of savings in material and services. So going forward, speaking with Gerhard in August, the goal was to, get back to a balanced budget. We didn't want to keep going forward with having deficit budgets. So we knew going in it was going to be a challenge. And then, we got the great news from our insurance company when the wildfire rating went up to 90. And we were looking at a $350,000 increase in our insurance from the previous year. So that just was another kind of thing that's like, oh no, but now we have to figure it out. And honestly, back at that point, and James and I were talking, it's like, okay, we're gonna have to have a special assessment. We're gonna have to figure out how to make up all this money.
We're looking at 12%.
Right, and we were looking at some significant increases. So we had 3 meetings with the finance committee, 2 in October, then 1 in November. And from the beginning, the goal was to find a way to get to that balanced number. And so we took some steps, and you'll kind of see there are things that we haven't done in the past as far as increasing maintenance, increasing the reserve contributions and other things. So we'll go through it all, but we are presenting a balanced budget, and there's some revenue goals in there that might be a bit of a challenge, but again, we'll kind of like we do what we always have done, is adjust as we kind of go through. So the first page here is just a big overview, and we'll kind of get into a lot of these details, but this is just the overall 2022 budget. Revenues of just over 12 million and expenses just over 12 million. About 63% of that comes from assessments. 98% of that is the homeowners assessments. And a really small portion is from the resort and commercial. And we'll talk quite a bit more about the resort and commercial a little bit later, what's kind of going on with their assessments and the calculation that's in the consolidated plan. If you kind of follow the arrow down, that 53%, so you can kind of just make a line that 3.6 million goes directly from the assessments into the reserves fund. So a big portion of our homeowners assessments basically funds the reserves. And that 3.62 is the exact same amount that we had in 2021. We had traditionally increased that by 5% over the previous years. And one of the last sheets we're going to look at here is the percent funding schedule going forward. We do have the 2042 goal of being 70 to 100% funded. And we do our percent funded a little bit different than a lot of places. We also include our new capital and future expenditures that are not just replacing the current reserves. We include those to kind of keep on track, because we use the reserve money to fund new capital unless there's a special assessment. So we'll look at that in a little more detail later. Program revenue, 4.4 million. A lot of that comes from the rec programs at 3.55 million. We'll get into a little more of that, of the expanded goals that we have as far as gate and events coming forward in 2022. And then, a lot of other areas that are important, seeing community development, the contracts and agreements we have with service districts, the storage yards, et cetera, et cetera. But the majority of it is my recreation program. So.
Hi.
And then it's a really small percentage, 1% is from the miscellaneous, and that's part of that is the TDS road fee that we get on a quarterly basis. Looking down the bottom there, and again, there's slides that kind of go through these in a lot more detail, but the operating expenses, 8.51 million. 63% is departmental, and that is personnel related services and material expenses. And then non-departmental, about 7%, and that is legal and insurance, which unfortunately we'll talk about has increased, but it's looking favorable that we're going to, and we've included this in the budget, have the savings by switching over to AIG. I'll talk about that now, I guess. So Randy Hughes was here last month and talking about the wildfire ratings and how Philadelphia would not renew, basically because they could not get the reinsurance on our property. And so we were kind of at a point where we needed it. And so we signed up for insurance, and it was about 350,000 more than it was the previous year, for basically half the limit, 15 million. And then after our 10/1 renewal date, AIG kind of came in and said, well, we're willing to, we think we're okay doing this, and it's going to be about $100,000 savings, but we have to stay with the current insurance for at least a quarter or there's cancellation fees, and monetarily wise, it doesn't make any sense. So earlier this week, a loss consultant from AIG, contracted by AIG, came out and visited us and spent a lot of time with Patty, talking about our ladder fuels reduction plan and our Firewise Safe program, and then spent a lot of time with Mark and Greg, who's in our facilities department, looking at all of our buildings, all of our safety, all of our sprinklers and everything. And, we had a meeting with him after, and he could not have been more complimentary about how our programs are set up, especially the ladder fuels and all the safety protocols that we do and the testings that we do for our sprinklers. And so he, was going to write a very, favorable report to AIG. And he was actually honestly surprised that Philadelphia canceled us without even coming to visit or coming to see our programs and doing that. It ultimately came down to that rating, unfortunately. So hopefully that's a good sign. Our broker, who's been our broker for a lot of years, he's sort of close to retirement, but not there. And his comment to me is, if I don't get this done for you, I'm going to retire. So we included that savings from the increase in this next year's budgets, that $100,000. So, but it was a positive movement that we had this week. So ask questions as we go through, or if you have comments, please make them. Just all the slides. So looking at the next page here, the operating budgets and reserve budget, kind of another overview page, and kind of give a little bit more detail on some of these, but the operating revenues are 1.3 million more than the 2021 projections. The total assessments about 5% higher, and that's partially because we'll talk a bit more later about the commercial and resorts actually going down compared to what they were this year, and that's a trend that's been going on for a while. But the homeowners assessments, we're looking at the 6%, which is $100.92 more than it was this current year. Program revenues, which is the significant piece of it, $961,000. RPPs, we're looking at a 5% increase. So basically $291.50 per card instead of $281.50 or whatever. Right. So, and then the MPP is going up by $5 per card. And then kind of the big one is the $500,000 in gate. The finance committee, had a lot of conversations about that. That is an unknown, right? And so we haven't had really gate in a couple of years, and things are starting to open up. And if we can get the lifeguards and talk more about those, is having the more availability in sessions and larger sessions. We think that we can have gate come back to us, and so we're very hopeful on that.
Just as a reference point, before COVID, our gate admissions typically was on the $700,000 to $750,000.
Right. So it's less than we've done in the past, but still a pretty aggressive goal.
Yeah.
And then also bring back events and concerts and those type things. So we hired a full-time events coordinator director fourth quarter. So we're looking to have ticketed concerts. We're looking to have encore. We're looking to have weekly, all those things, weddings. And Camille, who has been here for 6 weeks or 2 months, flies, but she's on it. She's done a great job as far as a lot of activity. And so we think that's going to happen. And then operating expenses, personnel services, 500,000 more than last year. And while that looks like a big number, it's not really, mostly compared to last year's actuals. And we obviously had a lot of shortfall in our part-time recreation department. Finding lifeguards, finding part-time attendants.
I wonder if we could project.
Sure.
I don't share the screen.
It's on my thing. It's on the one of the.
It's on the dashboard.
On personnel services, is that, are we planning on lifeguards at the owner's pool, or had we decided we're going to do that?
We're planning on lifeguards at the owner pool for at least the regular Memorial Day through Labor Day.
When we can do it unguarded, why are we looking at doing it guarded?
Because
Policy, it's something we've always done.
We had this discussion before you came on the board, and the big answer to it was liability if something were to happen. We've always had lifeguards there. Our owners expect lifeguards there. And that it was better to try to do it that way when the general pool and our owners and kids and families are using that pool. We might have an option this year to allow some lap swimming early on and late on without lifeguards. But our goal is for the safety of the community, we will have lifeguards during most of the time.
I don't, and I understand we've done it that way in the past. I don't think that's ever a good reason to do something in the future is because we've always done it that way.
It's a safety issue.
Well,
Liability.
we're, by state rules, my understanding is we're not required, if it's a private facility, just like a hotel's not, to have it guarded, and people can go in understanding that this particular facility is not guarded. The Shark is, because we're required to do that because we have it open. I think we should consider having that not guarded. I think it will open up more availability of the facilities. I think it will be less of an impediment of us if we don't have to have lifeguards there. And it's something we can do, as opposed to we've always done it that way in the past. I think we should consider it. And I think that that would bring also down some of the operating expenses that we have in doing so.
Yeah, I mean,
Just a thought.
it's a policy issue more than a financial issue for me. I mean, so it's definitely, you know, the board's.
Yep.
You know,
It's definitely the consensus of finance.
And that was part of
we want to put it in the budget to have lifeguards.
Yeah.
Sure.
One comment to add to that is we are required to have a lifeguard because we have a slide there. So we have a lifeguard at the slide itself. So that's the only lifeguard that's required to be at the member pool.
Okay, so we have to have one.
Correct.
Okay. So we'd have to have somebody there regardless to let people in, to tell them when the end of
we'll
the
have
session
staff
is,
there.
these types
Yeah.
of things.
Staff to maintain chemicals of pool and.
Exactly.
operations, Yes.
Exactly. But
And
we
first
could,
aid. We have to have.
But
some
actual
for that too.
guards.
yeah, I mean, we could decrease the number, decrease operating expenses, and still provide the same or even better availability with that facility, which obviously last summer got a very overwhelming response. And from, I personally use that all the time. And the response that I heard from almost 100% of the lap swimming, not recreation, was they'd be very happy to be there unguarded. So
Yeah.
anyway,
And that's
my 2 cents.
Thank you.
so again, personnel services increased a lot for the opening, and then there was a lot, a significant amount of turnover this year due to people moving to other positions and some due to COVID. Material services up 420,000. Some of that, and a lot of that is, we were actually closed. This is compared to actuals. The first quarter of 2021, the Shark facility was closed. Member pool wasn't really in service till later in the year. So a lot of these things are coming online and being open for a full year. Department heads, as James and Gerhard had mentioned, have done a really good job. Keep red line, and they knew that this was going to be a challenging budget. Non-departmental plus 65,000 over actuals, and that's related to insurance. So again, presenting a balanced operating budgets. Looking on the reserve side, new capital and replacement reserve expenditures, 1.7 million in replacement items. And the significant ones kind of always, the roads and asphalt, 675,000. Tunnel replacement, and Mark will have a couple comments on tunnel replacement. We had a discussion about this yesterday at the finance meeting. But ladder fuels, another $300,000. And again, the consultant was very impressed with the plan that we had for ladder fuels, the rotation, and the amount of resources that we do spend on ladder fuel reduction. So Mark.
Tunnel?
Tunnel.
Okay. So the tunnel that we're looking at is the Fort Rock Tunnel. And we had basically 2 different options. The tunnel that we have been putting in is what's called a precast, which means made someplace else, brought in, all that kind of good stuff. The advantage of a precast is you can keep the road closed for a shorter period of time. And we sent out pretty much the same bid document and everything else for the tunnel. The bid came in at 630-ish thousand for the first one. Our budget for it was 500,000. Well, that doesn't quite match. So went back to the engineer and the contractor who we have an excellent relationship with, and then asked them to see what they could do for working with us to try to get to where we need to be. one of the ways we got there was basically doing a cast in place. So they pour it right where they're making it versus bringing it in. The downside of that is that it takes longer for the road to be closed. So with a cast in play or a precast, we're looking at 5 to 6 weeks. With a cast in place, we're looking at 8 to 9 weeks, right around there. So it's a 2 to 3 more weeks, but we're looking at saving $130,000 to $140,000 for being closed for another 2 to 3 more weeks. It makes it fit within our budget, and we're looking at constructing that in the spring. But and shut stuff down for maybe a year. We're looking at shutting stuff down for maybe 2 months. It's kind of where we're at. And we'll have to work with the emergency services and everybody else with that, because Port Rock is a pretty busy area. We're gonna have to make sure that they're in the loop with what's going on and how to access emergency type concerns.
So the finance committee pretty much agreed that that was the extra couple of weeks was worth savings that we could have. $500,000, but
And I should also say that this is something that can work at maybe a few locations, but there may be other locations where there's not another access point around them. And so it might be looking at precasts just to make sure that we can keep it closed for the shortest period of time. That way we can get traffic emergency services and stuff. So this is for this tunnel and maybe a few others.
Was the one by Circle 4 precast?
The one
by Circle 4?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the two that we currently have in place are precast. One of the disadvantages of precast, especially now, is that you're dependent on all sorts of other folks. You have to depend on the people making the metal frames, all that kind of good stuff. Then you have crane operators, you have shipping, you have all that because it's made in the Valley, or this was going to be made up in Washington. With cast in place, you have a contractor that is able to control all the supplies and everything for the job themselves.
So moving on, new capital, we have $781,000, $380,000 that is the Mary McCallum Park and the restroom pavilion. There was $235,000 that was previously approved in 2021. That really hasn't been spent, so that project looks forward to going forward in 2022. New roundhouse and storage design and permit fees, $200,000. So we're looking at, that's about 10% of what the estimate is for the overall project. So $2 million for that, but getting those fees and design work out of the way.
Is
And
that
then
Mary McCallum also? Roundhouse?
No, that's our public works.
no,
okay.
that's public works share. That's that project over there. And then one of the other items is, getting conduit and fiber basically from Circle 4 to the member pool, and the 65,000. And you can see that says contingent approval. Remember last year, there were 4 or 5 items that we kind of had in the budget, but before going forward, we went to the finance committee and the board for their approval. This is really the only item in this budget to do that with. And it really, it depends on where the telecommunications committee and those results come from and what's going forward with that. And so a little bit more clarity in that area before we kind of go forward with this project, if we're going to go forward with this project. And then Shark reserve expenditures, 543. And really why we kind of separate this one out. So we're still getting, and we'll see this later, and when we look at the percent funded, we're still getting cash in from the Shark assessment. Those folks that were on the 15-year monthly payment or the 15-year annual payment, they're still over $1 million coming in from those funds. And so we keep those in a separate account because those are restricted just for replacement reserve items on the Shark. And 543 is a pretty significant amount more than usual. I think we had the conversation last year. We figured out that the replastering of the pools definitely cost more than we originally had in the reserve study. And so we did some last year, but we did not do the outdoor pool. We did the Lindsay River and we did the spa area. And so this year we're looking to do the outdoor pool. And next year the indoor pool. And then there's some boilers, and the building is, it's built in 2012 and 11 and 12. So it's, 10, 11 years older. So there's things that are coming up more so on the schedule, but it's great that we still have those kind of set aside cash on that side. Aside from the 3.6 that were put in the reserve budget from operations, we're still getting cash reserved for that. And then the recreation reserve fund of that 1.3 that we were hopeful not to tap this year, and we're not going to need to tap this year. There's no plan increase for it, but there's a plan just to keep it sitting there, earning no interest.
One thing, this is a bit speculative, but I think, Joe, you can comment on it too, but we were able to run a budget deficit the last 2 years without running into a cash flow problem. We probably can't do that next year.
Yeah, not a significant deficit.
Yeah,
for sure.
if we have a significant deficit next year, we will run into a cash flow. But now, let me be clear, we have plenty of cash.
Yeah.
It's just that in the operating
Right.
budget, we won't have
Other
sufficient
pots,
cash
we have plenty.
to get us through the end of the year. And so this is, there are some risks associated with this budget, and it's clear we are going to have to, manage this as we go, because there are some things that, if COVID persists or we can't get lifeguards and we're not going to get the $500,000 of gate fees, we're going to have to react.
Yeah, we're fortunate to be in a cash position from the years of success to get through these past 2 years without having to tap into that reserve fund. But that's one of the key reasons we want to have a balanced budget, a realistic balanced budget.
Yeah.
Next page. Total operating revenues, kind of just a little bit more detailed. Kind of went over a lot of these before, so 1.3 million more than last year. Again, the owner's assessments, 5.3% increase, 387,000, and again the 6% from residential and commercial residents, and then the 5.7% decrease, which is important from the commercial and resorts. And then looking down at the non-assessment.
That, I'm sure there's a lot behind that. The residential increase now is, I think we do get a pretty good bang for our buck on our homeowners. But it's a bit of a gag reflex, increasing our homeowners and decreasing the commercial and resort.
Right, there's a next slide, there's a formula, and we're kind of locked into how we calculate that. And then we'll have more of a detailed conversation about that.
This is a 2022 challenge, and James is already working on it.
Right.
And I think this is an issue that is going to have to be addressed next year.
Yep.
One way or another.
Yep, two more slides. There's a little bit more detail on it, and then we'll kind of go into the why and what the plan could be to remedy some of that.
Yeah, and I saw the slide on it. I'm sure there's more behind it, and I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, we will dive in. Then the non-assessment revenue, again, recreation is obviously the biggest portion of that, the 5% increase in RPP, the number of preference that we discussed. Yeah, again, and then the ticketed concert and the special programs. And one of the things that we talked about, we hired Camille here in the fourth quarter of 2021. Going forward, besides the fact that having events and having programs and having all those things in Sun River is great for the community, and very positive aspect of it. Is that position covering their costs? And in the budget, it is basically between the events, the private events, the weddings and business meetings and ticketed concerts and all those things. There's a $10,000 to $15,000 positive inflow of revenue from that. So just by what I've seen from Camille so far, not to predict too much, but I think she'll exceed all those goals.
Yeah, I think the other thing to point out on this slide, you can see the graph on the right-hand side. We're getting back to the revenue that we had in 2018.
Right.
Okay, so James and the team and Joe, have to make that work. We're talking about 2022, so this is 4 years later. Make the organization work with the revenue inflow that we had 4 years ago.
And one of the last things is the accounting department continues to be a revenue generating source for the organization. And, it's currently $300 for the transfer fee, and we were going to raise it to $400, but I think it was Clark, somebody in the finance committee was make it $450. So we'll be sending out a letter.
It wasn't me. It was a good move.
Title companies, and basically that amount gets absorbed in the closing costs, not to say that's.
Let Let the record know that James and Joel highly resisted this move, but the finance committee stashed it down their throats.
So does this rate only cover our cost to provide the service, or are we making a little bit?
They're a revenue source.
Well, it's, costs have gone up a lot, so, it's pretty close. I mean, I think we could defend it if we had to, but yeah, it's.
I don't like it.
I think we would call this a junk fee in closing real estate, but,
Yes, we would.
but we can say, well, this covers some of our staff overhead and.
It does
other
take a lot of
expenses.
time to transfer ownerships and
Sure.
questions.
Well, I absolutely agree with
Demand.
covering our costs of providing the service.
We
Don't
can
necessarily
probably,
agree that a government should be making money off of it.
Well, good news is we're not a unit of government here. but-
it's true.
We didn't have Evansville.
I'm revealing my past, aren't I?
Yeah.
Yes. Moving on to the next slide. Operating expenses, about $1 million over what we were spent this year. There is a 3% merit pool. And to make that clear that, the 3% is definitely, it's not a cost of living, it's not an automatic, it's a pool based on performance, and those reviews are done by the department heads. Those reviews are reviewed with James, and recommendations are made on that, so about $117,000 in budget for that. Events manager talked about that, Camille, and then, the 2 full-time lifeguards. So what we did, and that's just been discussed, and, we took labor out of the part-time schedules for aquatics and move that money over to have 2 full-time lifeguards for very plethora of reasons, just consistency, recruitment, having the ability to be open more days. They're basically the cost of it all, a little bit higher rates and the burden associated with having a full-time lifeguards, so this $25,000 increase in the budget, but we think that, that will certainly help us reach our goal of the $500,000 gate is having these full-time people here. So
It provides us more certainty when projecting hours that we can be open, days that we can be open, increasing the days that we can be open. I mean, just basically when you have part-time labor, as is the case with any business, those employees that are getting hourly wage maybe aren't getting benefits or more apt, they're not as loyal.
and we saw this year how hard it was to find those folks.
But, and again, that's part of my point is we got to market that we are increasing access. We are, yes, your homeowners fees are going up. Yes,
Here's
the
what you did.
RPP is going up, the MPP is going up, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring you a better service than what you had last year.
Burden plus 61,000, this is one of the things that kind of worked out in our favor from the first draft of the budget to what we were now. We originally had a 10% increase in our health insurance, kind of not knowing exactly what was going to happen. And knock on wood, we were at the Bend Chamber of Commerce, and so they came in at 3.6 and basically for the same plan, which was great to hear. Workers' comp, we've discussed that a lot before, and that 0.6 mod factor is the lowest our broker has ever seen. So that it decreases our workers' comp insurance from what it was the previous year. The higher payroll, but still paying less than workers' comp than we did the previous year. So that's great. So the overall burden rate of 31%. When I was first started here, it was about 34%, and so 31 is a pretty good number. Compare that to the service district. This is a strategic plan. $15,000, and that was kind of discussed in length at the finance committee meeting, and James is going to take lead on that project, but feels like that is a good number for that. And then on the last couple things, the Meadow fence plan out by the river access, 12,000 for that. And then the big one, obviously we talked quite a bit about, is the property insurance plus 165,000 over what we actually paid this year. Owner assessment, so here we go. Homeowners, 420,000 more in 2022. You can see we've had an average increase between 2014 and 21 of just under 4%. Obviously, you can look on the graph on the right, you can see that it's kind of ticked more like that because we've had the 6% increase over the past couple of years and the 6% budgeted for this year. But then the resort and commercial, and that's an interesting graph, right? It's going up pretty steadily from 2013 to 2017, and then basically a decline every single year since that. And so in the consolidated plan, there's a formula that calculates this amount of the assessment, and it's based on the total real market value of Sun River. So what the Deschutes County assessor says the real market value of your home is, not what you pay in property taxes, but what they feel the real value is. And while the homeowners houses, all your houses have gone up pretty considerably every single year, and this year, they average about 12% on a single family home here. The resort and the commercial properties real market value has stayed flat over the past few years, has not increased at all. And so when you're dividing those numbers into a bigger total market value of Sun River, their percent of what they pay has gone down. And so obviously it's a weird thing that's happened over the last few years. And James and I have had conversations with the county. They've had some reasons why they say that those values haven't increased, but in essence, that's what's causing this slide to go down. And so there's one line in the consolidated plan, which thankfully is there. And we'll see how this work plans out, but it basically says, this is the formula unless it's mutually agreed upon between the parties to do something different or have a different rates. And James had a conversation with Denise at the village.
Yeah, and she acknowledged, just from a managerial standpoint, that for their fees to go down, if she were in our shoes, she would be asking the same question. Why are you paying less fees when overall valuations have gone up for all of the residential properties? And it showed that it's been flat for the commercial properties and the resort properties. That said, based on that last sentence within that provision in the consolidated plan, it will take negotiation with them, with the resort. I haven't been able to contact the resort yet. It'll probably next week, week after. But in short, what I foresee is us going to them with a proposal that would be maybe akin to what the increase has been for the residential property owners, and say, here's a proposal, please agree with us that you shouldn't be paying less. Your properties actually have gone up in value. We don't control what the county tax assessor determines in your real market value. But I think we can all sit here and agree that your value has gone up. So let's have your assessment match that, similar to what owners. And that's where I foresee that we will work on that with Joe, come up with a number.
We change the consolidated plan.
Exactly.
That's the other thing is, either we get them to agree to this or we have to change it.
Right, which may be the better long-term solution.
It may be. Yeah.
Near term, I think we should negotiate to see what we can make up this year.
Yeah.
But long term, and again, I projected it in my head as a vote. We're going to a vote of the owners, and the owners are seeing that they're paying more in their assessment every year on their home. And we have, just being blunt, resort and village property that has remained flat and then actually gone down.
I mean, they were paying almost 230,000 in overall fees in 17, and you can see this year they're paying 180. And so,
I couldn't see the owners having a problem.
no, I think that would be one of the more popular votes.
I like James' suggestion that we tie the resort and commercial to the increases that the owners themselves have. I think everyone can stomach that.
Yep.
My taxes, my taxes went up 50% this year. 50%, not 12%, not 7%, 50%.
Well, let me clarify two things though. One is the real market value. When you get your tax statement, there is the tax assessed value, and that's what your tax increases are based upon.
But it has no relation to reality.
It has no, that tax assessed value is separate from the real market value.
Right.
And so as your tax assessed value goes up and your taxes go up every year, typically your real market value should adjust up accordingly. But in these cases, for these properties, when you look at the tax, you're going to go back in history, it's remained flat on the county tax assessor. So that's the formula. We're tied to the county tax assessor's data, which we have no control over.
And realistically, the county assessors, the RMD is kind of a feel-good number for them. I mean, it doesn't really
It means
relate.
nothing.
It doesn't relate to the market or anything, it's just a number they can put on your tax statement that says, we're really not taxing you at the full value of the house.
But, so in the long run, I mean, your tax assessed value is going up and your taxes are, so they're getting their money.
Yeah.
Whereas we've tied our number, our formula to something that who knows why they do or don't adjust it. Joe did some comparison, for example, the village to the old mill district, very similar types of setups in terms of how you shop and how it's developed. And it has gone up.
Some of those,
The real market
those
value.
properties were going, the real market value is going up, so.
We,
More digging to do, but yeah.
we need to do this, I think, too sweet, to change this as quickly as possible and I like James' idea of aligning with what the owners are paying, and you're right, this would be a popular vote with the owners.
Yeah.
To do this, if we had to bring it to a vote. But just looking at this, saying we're paying more, and
Fairness.
I'm okay with that. But the resort and commercial are paying less. It's like- And, I think if our 4,000 plus owners see this, they'll probably think the exact same thing.
Sure.
And I think what we would end up, working with the resort and the village long-term, if we want to change our consolidated plan. I would like them to endorse the language that we would put to a vote of our owners. And ultimately, I don't think it would be a number that would put them out of business, so to speak, if they were paying more. in assessment.
You'll have to take a look at measure 4750 back from 1996 as well.
Okay.
And not only should we be looking at a percentage increase from this space, but we should be looking at a little extra to help to recuperate the 4 or 5 years of it going down.
Sold. I don't disagree with that.
Over a period of time, not.
Sure, I mean,
quickly in 1 year. But for fairness, again,
it could be an
it's not
adjustment
about,
scale.
just gouging them. It's about fairness.
No.
And they benefit from the quality that we have here in Sun River.
Absolutely.
And during COVID,
The
they
village had a good
had
year.
banner years the past 2 years, actually.
Yeah,
So-
they both.
Yeah, they're not hurt. Okay. So that's that story. And then the last slide, and before we get to the percent funded kind of worksheet here, and this is more of a cash look. So in the 3 different kind of reserve areas, the replacement reserve, new capital, we're looking to end the year just over $8 million in funding, a little bit of interest income, hopefully more this year as we kind of go forward. Putting that 3.6 million in contribution in there. And then we have quite a few fourth quarter. We always try to transfer money from the next quarter going back. So 1.6 million in fixed assets, and a lot of that has to do with the asphalt and ladder fuel that's been happening this fall. Looking at 2.48 in 2022 expenditures, so kind of year-end balance of 7.64. And
Let me make one comment here, because one of the things we did with the 2022 budget, as Joe mentioned earlier, is that in past years, it's not required, but by tradition, we have increased our contribution to reserve by 5% over what it was the previous year. And it's not written into any bylaws or anything. It's just been kind of a financial tradition we've had. This year, we broke that tradition. We said, we're just going in with the same number that we did last year. And you can see, I mean, this is a projection again, so things could turn out differently, but you can see we're ending with a year-end balance of 8.14 million this year. And next year, we're projecting a year-end balance of 7.64 million, about $50,000 less. Okay, that's not sustainable. And so, the challenge for Joe and James and the finance committee for the 2023 budget is going to be, we have to get back to putting more into that reserve account.
Yeah. And you'll
And
see
so,
forecast here that.
yeah, and that's why, as I said earlier, that's why, one of the things we have to look at, and there are a number of opportunities, is what are the additional revenue sources that we can tap into? Resort commercial is one of them, okay? Gate fees is another one, and expanding RPPs, MPPs is another one. So we just have to start thinking about how do we leverage our resources to get a higher level of income other than just increasing the owner's assessment by 6% a year.
And to do the math for you, if we had increased our contribution by 5%, that would have been an additional $180,000 in the budget.
Which is basically not a 2.5%.
So then the $50,000 drop, we would have seen a $130,000 increase in the reserve fund.
Can we pencil out, if we do increase the commercial,
Oh,
and resort, what that would, not right now, but if we can pencil it out, so we have an idea maybe in the next meeting, what that's gonna look like. If we do bring them up to parity with the owner.
Sure. I mean, it'll be an amount, but we're $12 million budget. We're looking at
Yeah.
$50,000. It's not saying it's insignificant.
It's not gonna solve all of our problems, and that's why I said we have to
But
start
it can be a
looking at a
piece.
bunch
Sure,
of different
absolutely.
revenue sources.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, a lot of us have been managers before, and we know that, it's a lot nicer, it's a lot more enjoyable to generate additional revenue than it is to cut expenses.
Yep.
And so, we just have to start, and I think, again, SROA owners and SROA as an organization has made significant investments in infrastructure over the past 5 to 10 years. And we have the opportunity to leverage that more, in my mind.
And to do the math again, last year, if the resorts and commercial paid 190,000 according to our graph, a 6% increase of that would be about $12,000. Not huge at all, but it would be
Not much,
a
but it's
step in the
something.
right.
But yeah, it's
direction.
kind of compounded on itself over the
Yes.
past few
Yeah.
years, right?
But it's also equity too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a
Yeah,
fair
it's about equity.
Yes.
Okay. It's gonna make our owners feel a whole lot better than
Sure.
saying, what?
Looking at the shark reserves and talked a little bit about that. Again, we kept it, keep a separate account just for those funds coming in. End the year with just under $300,000. Put another about $300,000 in next year from assessments coming in for the 15 years and spending just over $500,000. So basically using most of that money in 2022 on the shark reserves. But again, there'll be some more money coming in for that. And then at some point, we'll be using the regular reserve account to fund the shark. That's just the way it's going to be.
At the finance committee meeting, we had a conversation with Mark, and he's trying to bring Shark back kind of up to snuff, so to speak. And he's making a big investment this year, and he's anticipating another big investment next year. And so again, these are things that we do need to do. They're important, but it's going to put more stress on our budget for 2023.
And then the recreation emergency fund, the 1.3 million, earning nothing. And then ending the year at 1.3 million.
It earns something, but it's
Well,
not. It's so negligible.
The decimal points aren't long enough on this sheet.
Yeah.
to get to
It lost money.
Right, yeah, sure.
Because of the fee.
And the last sheet I want to get to, and I'm Jesus, it's quite too hard to find do that quickly, but is this there's a green line on it. I think it was just the first one past your presentation, so it should be pretty easy to find that little paper copy of that. So, this is a really important thing that we've kind of hinted on a few times in our meeting today. So this is a percent funding forecast from now into 2050. And, in the consolidated plan, harp on this, but 2042 is written into it that we want to be fully funded by that year. That equals basically 70 to 100% funded at that point. And so you can see most places I mentioned before, they'll kind of stop on the column that says expenditures. So they're really the true calculation for percent funded for an organization is replacement of current assets. Not looking, so you're funding basically what your current assets are on a replacement schedule. We take it a step further in the fact that we use that fund also to fund new capital and projects. And so we've added that column on the right there to have new capital. So working with Mark and James and things that are on the IAMP, you can see that there's some pretty significant items coming up. The public works yard, so the pathway master plan between 2 and 3. Phase 2 of the public works. We kind of know those things are in the plans and we put estimates there. And we also know that every year that there's new capital things that come up. regardless if it's new equipment or new project or something that's not on our current replacement schedule that we wanted to. So we also put some placeholders in there of $250,000 a year to put that, have a number there, because we know that's going to be something. And so the assumptions basically are 2.5% inflation, which, you know, sounded great a couple years ago, doesn't sound great right now. This has a 3% annual contribution increase. And Gerhard mentioned the tradition has been 5% a year over. And so, you know, there's lots of variables that you can play. You can sit there and play with this thing all day long, and as far as different calculations and different scenarios. But right now, the green, you can see that we're just over the 70% funded in 2042. And again, tons of things will change. You know, if the firehouse is sold to the service district, all of those items that are in the reserve study will come out of our reserve study because they'll be their responsibility now. So that'll be a positive. If we have a Ferris wheel that, you know, Don Nelson, wherever we wanted to put, you know, there'll be new capital projects that come up that are not on here. We typically spend less out of our reserves than we have budgeted due to savings or things not happening. So there's always this is a moving target consistently, but we need to have the projections. And so the finance committee had good discussions about this and about adding the 250,000. Just so this is where we're at right now.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, again, projecting out to 2042 is, you know, like sticking a thumb up in the wind. You don't really know what's going to happen between now and 2042. But the plan tells us we're marginal with a 3%.
And partly what this says is it's not going to be easy.
Yeah.
We're going to have to pay attention to costs. And we stuck in one of just a recent finance committee meeting, this 250,000. But when you think about us adding new things, you know, the Mary McCollum Park Pavilion is going to be $390,000. And we put in, you know, how many new ideas we're going to have for the year after. Sure. And the year after and the year after, this 250 is a low number. And so if all of a sudden we start spending $400,000 or $500,000 in new projects every year, this is not going to be achievable.
It's just going to prioritize with projects.
Yeah, it's going to require attention and prioritization, and maybe some successful things happening.
Yeah, and you know,
like
again, this has a 3%.
The building on the fire department out of reserve study will be about a $400,000 addition, and then also savings for the future on that.
Yeah, and the other possibility, and we're hoping this doesn't happen, but there may need to be a special assessment. You know, as an example, the public works debt. Maybe to, because we're planning on spending, you know, over, I think, $4 million, that may need to become a special assessment. We're hoping we can manage it within the confines of what we have right now, but we'll have to take a look at that.
So we mentioned this last meeting. If we're between the 70 and 100%, is that a point where we could actually self-insure?
It's not self-insuring. All we're saying by that is that we have the financial bandwidth to replace all of our existing capital assets as they become, you know, as they reach their end of life.
Right, but where we, last meeting, when we had this exorbitant amount of increase in our insurance, we talked about one of the one of the possible options is, do we put this amount that we would otherwise pay for insurance to self-insure? And that's a little bit of a reach, probably a lot bit of a reach to get there. But is that something that we're there at 2042,
if we have
assuming everything else?
Right. If we have $20 million in the bank in 2042 on a 100% balance of $28 million, I mean, it's possible we could do that, or possibly reduce the amount of insurance we have on a property at that point. Yeah.
One of the things to keep in mind is there's a lot of infrastructure in Sun River, roads and pathways and tunnels, as an example, that are not considered assets. And so they're not on our depreciation schedule. And so, you know, I mean, if we had an event that destroyed a lot of roads or a lot of pathways or whatever, that would be an expense that would not be covered by our existing reserves. And then there's, you know, there's the whole, you know, and again, the common area, you know, and what can happen to the common area? Well, all the trees can burn down. Is that a big thing? Well, it would change the nature of some really significantly if that happened. And so there are things that, are not covered by our reserve budget that are considered assets by members of the community.
The reserve fund covers anything with a useful life of 30 years or less. So if roads and the tunnel and anything else has a 40 or 50-year life, that's not included in here as being able to replace those when they come due.
The funding is in there, but they're not considered assets.
Yeah, they're not considered assets.
The dollars,
Yeah.
as far as the expenditures.
The expenditure, but they're not depreciated.
Correct, they're expenses, but those dollars are included in the expenditures. Any other questions? So, I mean, that's it. And so I appreciate the finance committee and all their work.
What's the process from here if we were to actually move forward with changing how we assess commercial and resort?
Would they, to change it would be a vote to change the consolidated plan.
Putting something on the ballot, to be honest.
Correct.
We
So that
would
would
do
be-
an amendment to the consolidated plan, and there'd be proposed language of how this
That'd be
portion would be calculated and a vote of the owners, which would happen in the May or November.
And-
I mean,
election.
I'm just gonna go out there and say that I don't think there's any way that it would be responsible to not go forward
Yeah.
with the change to the consolidated plan regarding this formula.
But we should piggyback it on another vote of the owners. So,
Yes, it can affect
Like,
this year's budget.
it could happen in our vote in July, for example.
yeah,
And in the meantime, that gives me an opportunity to discuss, say, with the owners of the village and the resort, two things. One, could we make up some fees that you haven't paid in the past couple of years?
Yeah.
And for them to be on board, I want them to support any change to the consolidated plan, even though it would cost them money. That's, I think.
yeah, they're partners and
Yeah.
we have to work with them as partners.
Yeah, we're not looking to rake them over the
Yeah.
coals. We're looking for them to pay their fair share.
And we have the fact of the democratic process that probably may result in something that will compromise. They're interested in working with us. All right.
As a board member, I just like to thank all of you who worked on this.
No, this
Tell
is-
Joe, at the next budget, this was fun stuff.
There's lots of pages and lots of lines and lots of
Yeah.
details.
It's a heavy load.
Yeah, you,
And the big
Good
have
work,
fun.
Good work.
the big work was done by Joe.
Yeah.
and
No,
James and the staff, and the department heads, is we kept going back to them, find some cuts, we gotta make this balance. We're not
That
gonna-
makes sense.
we're not gonna
I
ask for
told
another
Joe that if he
assessment.
leaves, I'm gonna have to retire.
And thank you, Bill, for pointing out
Yeah.
that there was nothing else.
I know.
So, well, thank you. All right, moving on then to maintenance fee discussion.
This is really quick, and actually, this has to do with items, tab C and D in the book. You don't really need to look at them, but they're action items for tomorrow. One, item, or tab C, is to approve the budget that was just presented to you, or with amendments that can be discussed tomorrow. And then tab D is related to this, is to increase the assessments of 6%. That's the second action item. And just real quick on that, it would increase the maintenance fee to $148.54 per month. That's 6%. That's $8.41 per property per month. But it also, this motion discounts $53.48 in your annual payment by paying before January 23rd. Yeah, so that's something that's been done every year. Here's your discount for paying early and letting us get extra money. So, so that's it. That's really the oral update. Those are two action items for tomorrow.
All right.
Yeah, just as a point of reference, what is about 53% of the people pay in advance?
Yeah, between 50-55% pay in advance, which is great. We get
Yeah.
that cash flow.
I mean, getting that cash in really gives us a lot of.
And a lot
flexibility.
less processing.
Yeah.
Just a lot less labor.
All right. Is it time for a break?
Sure.
It is. Let's reconvene at 10:55.
Sorry for my late arrival.
Saras on 2022 fees for services.
Yes.
Are you ready?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, thank you. You all get settled there. If you will turn to sections F in your board books, you will see the section titled 2022 fees for services. And just to give you a little background on how this gets developed, these are all of our revenue sources throughout the association. And we meet with Missions Model Work Group. We start working on this in the month of, really start planning the month of September. So we work on September, October, and November in Missions Model Work Group, which is made up of Bill Burke, Veronica Jacknow, Brad Banta, Bob Nelson, and then staff of James, the general manager, myself, and then in the future, our new recreation director, and Joe Healy, our controller. So that's the group that works on these. And so basically to make it easy for you, you'll see they're color coded. The right-hand side is the proposed 2022 proposed pricing, which Joe right now has put into the budget, just for as a placeholder. And then you can see what the rates were in the prior years back to 2018. So things that are highlighted in gray on the right-hand side, those are proposed changes. Everything else is not highlighted in gray, just says no planned change to the prior year. So just to make it easy. And the notes on the right-hand side, you can, at your leisure, we'll go over some of those notes, but basically overall for these, we're starting with recreation amenities. You're looking at about a 2 to 8% increase on average between each of these sections. As we're already aware, we're looking to change member preference from $55, which it was in 2019. There was no price change in 2020 or 2021, but we're looking at propose to $60 this year versus $55. We've already discussed that as Joe went through it on the budget.
Was there any discussion given to a larger change instead of $5, maybe a $10 or $15?
It's a
given the issues that Gerhard had pointed out longer term.
Yes, and we did. We talked about that, and we it's a sensitive subject, and the reason I say that is members feel that they want to get the value and the benefit right out of access to our recreation amenities. They already feel like they pay for in portion of their monthly maintenance fee. But honestly, you're right. It's a very extreme value for $60 for the entire year per membership card. So yes, I think it's incrementally. You'll see that in 2018 we were at 50, and then we went to 55 in 2019. And part of the reason for the increase this year too is because the member pool that went in. It was another added value to that membership program. Bill, you want to comment a little bit on that maybe at all? Why we didn't go higher than 60? Or?
I think it's what you're talking about in terms of the sensitivity. I'm sure there will be some people complaining, but I just look at it from my point of view. Like Scott and I during the warmer months will play petanque a couple times a week. There's improvements out there. During the warmer months, I might go to the pool a couple times a week. There's just so many things that are free, basically. And if you cost it out, like I guess what you're implying, like it probably costs me less than $1 per time I use any of our amenities. And what can you do for less than $1? But I think what it really goes back to is your comment about sensitive issue, I guess.
But it's always been a sensitive issue. This is sort of like trying to push a big boulder along. And we'll give recognition to the fact that our rates on a lot of things are less expensive than other offerings in the Deschutes County area. And I use the Shark. I would pay more than $60. I think it's a bargain. But I think we more than snappy repartee on my part. I think longer term are some of the issues, as we talked about with the budget, as to whether or not you're going to have the adequate amount of capital. Yeah, I think the idea from an SROA perspective is how do we maximize revenue? And we have to be careful, and I think this is part of what Keith was saying, we have to be careful that we don't scare too many people away. But at the same time, we have to be able to market the MPP as an extreme value to the owners and make sure that they understand all the benefits that come with an MPP so that, and there has been pushback in the past, there has been pushback and says, why do I have to pay why do I have to, in order to use Shark, which I paid for, as part of my, $4,500 or whatever it was, why do I have to now pay to get in? There's a lot of good reasons for that, but there has been some pushback in the past. But I think, part of it is, in my mind, says, yes, it is still an extreme value. We need to market it as an extreme value. And we can increase the rate, but we don't want to scare people away to the point where we get in less revenue.
I think those people that are complaining are gonna complain whether it's $40 or $80. I don't think it's gonna make any difference, really. You either like it or you don't like it, and I don't think $5 is gonna make a difference.
The biggest argument is that we paid for all these things that we now have to pay another fee to get it. And for like in our case, we went to the pools once. I didn't use the pools. I went to Mary McCollum Park a lot, but but again, we paid for that, all those improvements. So you're going to turn some people off. The higher you make it, you are going to lose some people. And the argument of things, hey, we already paid for those things and now you're charging us $80.
But we maintained them.
Yeah,
every day.
that's the issue.
I used the pool probably at least 60 times
Yeah.
last year. I didn't go to Mary McCollum Park a single time. But if I had to pay anywhere else, it's at least $5 to go swimming somewhere.
Individually each time.
Individually each time, yeah. So 60 times, that's $300 if I were to do that over at Juniper or whatever. And I pay 60, and I'm sure that I did more than, I did 12 times
The
in 2
people
weeks.
that live here full time use it a lot.
Sure.
That homeowner that comes here twice a year, you'd be surprised at how many we have that they have a home and they come here for 2 weeks out of the year and they don't rent it.
But a lot of them,
They'll buy a card if we make it a reasonable price, and whether they use any of the facilities or not during the time.
a lot of them have half a dozen cards for their renters when they do rent it, and their rent, and that is a point of marketing for them that their renters get to use these facilities.
Oh, yeah.
also.
And they're the ones that buy the RPPs for $3 grand.
The RPPs, there's good justification. I'm not opposed to making that number bigger than 60, but at the same point in time, I'm a little bit concerned that, my overall objective is maximize the revenue. And I would advocate personally, and says that our best chance of maximizing revenue is by incremental increase and better marketing of
The frog in the kettle concept instead of boiling the water. And, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, I can see what risk takers we have associated. I've been listening to this same argument. For 6 years, I was sitting in Gerhardt's seat as the treasurer. I heard that argument. There's always 1, 2, 3 people that don't like whatever it is you're proposing. So once you get over that, it makes it a little easier. I think the $5 is parsimonious. It's not enough. It should be something higher. But, I respect the work of the committee, but I think it's leaving money on the table that, depending upon how a few other things went in the economy, we would have wanted to have accumulated that additional.
I'll tell you, I would pay $75 and not blink an eye.
Again, the people that live here full time.
But that's less than a bottle of wine at dinner. I mean, to have access for the entire year. Well,
It's $15.
I appreciate the institutional memory too, because a lot of us weren't here those 6 years ago, never here. I also appreciate your ability to put parsimonious into a sentence. But just to be clear, I don't think there's anybody on a committee that doesn't think it's a great bargain. And I don't know that there's anybody on that committee that wouldn't say, well, okay, let's up it. I mean, I'd be fine with more.
It's, one of the things that we don't know at this point in time is what's the elasticity. Okay. And that's the thing that I get concerned about, because, as Clark was mentioning, there are a lot of people who buy the cards, and probably don't use the facilities very much because they're not here that much. And what we want to make sure is, that any increase in price that we put in place actually generates more revenue instead of scares more people away.
Let's venture boldly into let's get to the gaming table, so to speak here. And instead of doing 60, you do 65 or 70. We're really taking a chance there.
We are in a recreation area. If you buy a season pass for Bachelor, if you use it 100 times, or if you use it 2 times, it costs you the same amount for that season pass. You have some convenience of not having to wait in line for the tickets, which is part of this. You already have your pass, you give them your number, you walk on by. So there's a convenience factor, I think, that people utilize as well as a pass factor.
So for the sake of argument, say Mike's idea, say $5. We have $10 increase instead of 5. How much would that generate?
There's about 7,000 passes if the elasticity is very good.
About 35,000.
35,000. Yeah. If we don't lose anybody.
Right.
I would characterize this as a good discussion to be held in memory. Let's move on.
Was that a vote to table the discussion?
No, somebody can always bring it up tomorrow.
That's true. You don't go till tomorrow.
We don't have to make the decision today, right?
Right.
So why don't, between now and the next meeting, everybody just take their own little survey and ask people what they would.
This is tomorrow.
It is today.
Yes, tomorrow.
Okay, never mind.
Yes.
But we can increase it again next year.
I know, every year we can increase it.
Yeah.
Sure.
We could tie it to the CPI, which is going to be quite the increase this year.
I would recommend that we do the experiment of increasing it by $5 and see what happens in terms of the total.
When's the last time we increased it by $5?
2019.
2019.
And what happened?
We actually brought in more than we did when in 2018 by a hair.
There's your experiment. It's been done.
All right.
Okay.
Maybe
Who's on to line number 2?
The reason I am closing a bit is that I recognize lawyers when I see them.
Yeah.
And we have some who have just joined us. Having been a lawyer myself, I remember my hourly rate. And so I am pressing on with the expectation that we could get onto the lawyers part of the presentation as soon as we can, giving appropriate time to the remaining matters.
Yes. And just so you know, page 1 we're going through now is the most complicated, most detailed, and the rest of this will go much faster. The next on line item, basically member preference card holders limits basically allow 5 with the exception seats and more than, we used to limit the number of member preference cards per property. Now it's, if there's more than 5 per property, you have an exemption seat, they just sign off on, just be no, to keep track of that. Like some of the condos are 10th share, so why would you limit the other 5 owners to get member preference cards? So we've changed that in 2018 going forward to allow that. That'll stay the same. Replacement card fee, that means if someone loses their member preference card, it actually costs us time and money to replace that. And our replacement card rate for the owner storage lots is $25. So we're just mirroring those up so they're the same. In reference to Recreation Plus, so here's another change. So in the last time we changed the rate was from 2019 to 2020, went from $276 a card to $281.50 a card. And now we're looking to go to $295.50, which is a 5% increase over the prior year. 50 cents is not shown there, but it's $295.50. We've already talked about that as well in the budget. And I think that, you know, when you look at overall, about a 3-bedroom home, it's about it's roughly, you're looking about a $80 increase. So it's not much over the entire year. So it's very reasonable, and also to cover our cost for that program, that costs go up every year for that program as well. And the fact that, you know, we just built 18 pickleball courts too, just recently. I mean, there's more expenses out there. And then now there's more opportunity for people to utilize the Recreation Plus card as well. And some of those other amenities besides just Shark. And then extended family, which we talked about, it has been very popular. It was 123 in 2019. We did not change it the last 2 years. We're looking at an increase of about a 6% increase to 130 for the upcoming year. Extended family 1-week pass. These are people that just do a 7-day pass that aren't planning to be here enough to take advantage of an annual extended family. looking to change that from $72 to $75. So we're helping out there, Mike, don't worry. And then extended family upgrade, that just upgrade the difference between the two. So basically, if you take out a 7-day extended family and you really realize you're going to be here more and want to upgrade, we give them that option. And then long-term renter, which matches up to the extended family rate, so 123 up to 130. Any other questions on those membership cards for that section?
Quick comment, I'm
Yes.
not sure how we enforce this. A year or two ago, I saw about half dozen of our passes hanging in a house in Caldera as a rental.
So when we get, what we do, we actually track VRBO and free RBO, Airbnb, Facebook Marketplace, and we start seeing properties that are not within Sun River. We will contact that owner and we will find out. Whoever manages Caldera will find out. And so that way we reach back out to the owner here in Sun River and we'll let them know that that is not allowed. We had that issue one time last year over at Powder Village in the business park. Someone had taken half of their passes and put them in the Powder Village home because they own that one, plus they also owned a home in Sun River proper. And so we squelched that quite quickly also. So it's difficult to catch them all, but we tried to do that. We actually scoured the internet for that to make sure that doesn't happen very often. Sure. Getting to actual recreation, these are attendance recreation numbers. So basically these are rates. So if you look, our most recent gate rate in 2019 when we had gate was $26. In 2018, it was 25, so it went up $1. This year, we're looking to change to $28 for gate admission. And taking into consideration, we've not had gate the last 2 years, so there's going to be plenty of people clamoring they want access to the facility they've not been able to access in the past. However, we've also have a caveat here in all of these is we also are looking at the possibility of sticking with gate session times versus all-day access. One, it's much easier on our staff to maintain the facilities properly, safely also with COVID restrictions as well, but also gives an opportunity for our employees to take a break at the same time, which in theory, we have less employees needed, enough less lifeguard needed. We don't have to cover those rotations on those breaks, but they can all break at the same time for one. And also it kind of resets the day. And we've realized in the past that people do not stay 6-7 hours of the day. They're there for 3 to 4 hours. So I think it's an opportunity for us to look at sessions, which we've been doing over the last 2 years anyway. So it's something our staff is comfortable with, the guests and the owners are comfortable with. So that's something we're looking at. So that's why you see a 28 or 18 per session.
How do we distinguish the different color wrist plans?
Yes, so basically we would just change it for the day. Yeah, between the morning session and the afternoon session. Correct, exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, the people who have got a full day pass are going to have to exit the pool.
Well, no, we're going to do 1 to 2. So we're either going to do full day or we're going to do sessions. We won't.
Yeah,
do
but
both.
the people who have a full day pass, they have to exit the pool after.
Oh, right, they do that 4-hour session, right, correct.
Yeah.
And then they would be able to come back
And then
again
they
if they
have to
wanted
come
to.
back,
Yeah,
yeah.
but they would have to get back in line.
Yeah.
Yes, correct. And then multi-day is just basically it's a 20% discount. So that's what those rates are. So it's based on the new rates.
We trust you.
Yeah, these are all these percentages we've been worked through with the admission model work groups. I'm not going to go through line by line.
Yeah.
So basically, but they're each of those like splashy hour. I'll explain that real quickly for those who aren't familiar. Splashy hour in the past basically was the last 3 hours of the day. That was one of those times of the day we weren't getting a lot of use out of the facility. And so we discounted that for gate access for people to want to take advantage of the late afternoon sunset, basically come utilize the facility. And so we will look to bring that back potentially if we have that ability to do that, if we extend enough hours to be able to facilitate that offering. And then basically going beyond that, you've got member guest rates. So that just goes up $1 for a guest to come in and utilize the facility, or $7 per session. Then disc golf went up slightly as well. Central Oregon Sundays, that is a offering for residents that have they have to show proof of residency within Deschutes County, Crook County, or Jefferson County, and they would get in a discounted access on Sundays only. So that's we've been doing that for the last 4 years, except for the last 2 years because we didn't have access to gate. And then the rest, we have some school group pricing where it's going up about 2% on school group pricing, and also swim lessons, we're going up about 2% there as well too. So swim lessons, it's a higher fee that we pay our staff during the time they teach lessons versus their normal hours of when they're working there. So that just basically helps offset the cost of covering that difference, paying the staff for those additional hours they work when they're actually teaching swim lessons. We've not been able to do swim lessons in the last 2 years due to COVID restrictions. So we're hoping to be able to offer that this year, because obviously we want to try to keep our community and our children as safe as possible in the community. And that's one way we can do that. And we have some really great guards that, and aquatic supervisors that are instructors that are anxious to get back and helping kids. And then what you see below, basically the off-season rates, these are rates basically January 1st through the day before Memorial Day weekend, and then the day after Labor Day through the end of the year. And all this is a offset to what you see in the summertime, because it's less access, because you only have access to the indoor pool and the hot tub. So a lot less amenities being offered. Instead of going line by line, we basically kept it the same percentage increases noted above in the summertime recreation facilities and pricing. And then member pool, only thing different there. We're just looking to increase the number of hours the facility be open. So not only will we be increasing, last year we ran it basically where every year for the last 15 plus years was mid-June through Labor Day. We are looking at opening this year, Memorial Day weekend, and running it through the end of September. So basically we'll have about another 40 days added on that we've not had in the past. So that's the plan. And then we are looking to see, we'll probably either do sessions there as well, or all day access, depending on how busy you end up getting starting at the beginning of the year. But I think we have the ability to flex that if needed. Note it there. Any other questions on this sheet?
I'll give you one comment, and you know, this is, take it for what it's worth, but I would recommend that we come up with a more compact schedule. You know, less rates. And you know, that's kind of just an overall general comment to something that, you know, the admission model work would need to discuss. But I think we made this a lot more complex than what we probably need to have it. And by consolidating some of these rates into, you know, kind of a super category may make your life easier and make it easier for people to understand what our pricing structure is.
Sure, understand. You know, I think one of the group discounts and those rates and the summer camp pricing and school group pricing, all that's pretty easy to manage because it's all done ahead of time. And so those are reservations basically they make. And so that makes it a little bit easier because we can consolidate the groups into one payment structure versus multiple payments coming at a time for a larger group.
But again, you know,
I understand what you're referring to the actual offerings itself.
If you're an outside person, you know, I mean, you know, you go into a restaurant and the menu is 16 pages long and there's different prices depending on the time of day and stuff like that. It's just confusion.
Right. Sure. No, understand. You will take that into consideration. So thank you. Yes. Page 2, if you guys will flip to that. You'll note there that the only plan changes is we're switching now to tennis and pickleball operations. We're just adjusting some of our tennis all-day buyout and 5-hour buyouts for access to the facility. So these are when we have like USTA tournaments that request to utilize our facilities, or we have a private tennis tournament that want to utilize our facilities. We're just adjusting these rates because we no longer now have Tennis Hill, which used to be 6 tennis courts. So that is not an offering anymore. So we've made some adjustments there based on the court complexes we still have that are remaining. And so these are just a little bit of slight increase over what we charged for those areas in 2019. In pickleball, the only thing new there for proposed pricing is now that we have a 15-court pickleball complex, we have some all-day buyout tournament rental fees as well. So basically that gives them over 8 hours of access to that facility for the day. So we charge a fee up front for that. And usually those are fairly hands-off for our staff, which is nice. We can collect money up front and send them out, let them run their tournament. And our goal this year is we're hoping to have our own tournament at some point, it's a football tournament as well, that we will host going forward, which potentially could drive some more revenue as well. Any questions there? The only planned change in the event space, so we're not planning on making any event space pricing changes. The last time we had a price increase was 2020, and we basically were not even able to have events in 2020. So I feel like at this point, we haven't had a chance for people to really take advantage of that price increase or actually be aware of that price increase at that time frame. So the only note on here is in gray is in reference to liability insurance is required for each event. That is the case. But checking with our insurance company, we're not having to have clubs and organizations that are SROA clubs and organizations require that in a separate form because we're covered with our insurance. So that's the only note there. And as Joe mentioned earlier, Camille, our new events manager, she is She's working really hard. She's excited and she is already booking a lot of events for next year. And she and I are working on sponsorships for some of our events, and sponsors are like, yes, we want to be back. We want to participate, which is a good sign as well.
Any discussion on 2 concerts a year?
We're actually looking at doing 2 to 3 this coming summer. However, the reason we're able to potentially do this is because in the past, we did majority of the negotiations with the band ourselves and all the contracts and staging, lighting, etc. It's 3 to 4 months worth of work for one concert. Now, the same concert promoter we were working with has moved to a different company, and they put on about 1,000 shows per year. And so they have a proposal they're working on to send to us that's going to basically say, SROA, hands off, you guys don't have to do anything. We'll come and do everything for you. We'll pay you an event rental fee and we'll take the risk and you guys do not have to. However, you still have the ability to pick and choose which artists you want based on what their availability is and who's coming through the Northwest. So it'll be a better opportunity for us to provide more concerts and activities, but not as having to spend the back end time and effort and labor costs to set that event up. Really good. So we're working on it. It's huge. It's been definitely. Fort Rock rental rates and Mary McCallum reservation rates, there's no change at all compared to what we did in the past. And part of that is this is not a large revenue generator, but it actually, Fort Rock gets a lot of event rentals throughout the year, whether it's owner or general public access. But we have those rates. We did change the pricing in 2019. There's no plan for this year for pricing changes. Next page is community development. So there is no 2022 plan changes in pricing for reviews, building permits, and also construction project, et cetera. The reason being is because right now, as you all know, we're in the middle of the design review manual rewrite. And so at this point, we don't know exactly how that's going to finish out. It won't be probably done and ready for spring of 2022. So until we figure out what wholesale changes that may be made, there's no reason to try to change fees. It's something that may change again. So right now, there's no planned fee changes to what the ask of the applicant itself when they're submitting for a project. And Bill, feel free to chime in anytime and going through this as well.
You're doing a good job.
Thanks. Son of Racine advertising rates. So if you look on this sheet here, you see that we have not really made price wholesale changes on Son of Racine since 2018. We actually were looking at doing a modular format in 2019, which we never implemented. So those rates never went into place. So we're looking at a 10% increase in each of our ad sizes in regards to rates for the scene itself. So Susan and I think she just stepped out, but Susan and I were working on this quite a bit this year. And part of that reason is our printing cost for the printing press, which is in Wenatchee, Washington, is a 9% increase from 2022 compared to what cost of the scene in 2021. So basically this 10% just covers the cost of our additional expenses overall. And since we have not changed the rate since 2018, I don't think advertisers will be too disturbed by the change since it's been 4 years since we've changed the price. And then there's also a price increase on the owner directory advertising itself, which is an annual publication. So those have gone up just slightly as well. And then last but not least, RV storage rates. So there is no planned changes for 2022/2023. So that is on a July through June cycle. And the reason is we just literally went up a 30% increase this year, starting July 1, compared to the previous 10 years. So it was a big jump, and we wanted to make sure that everything is organized and set for this year. And I'm proud to say that all 337 RV spots we have, they've all paid the new rates. So the money is in-house. We're still waiting on a few new agreements, but people understand the reason. We also added the swipe cards as well. So we added value. And then we also added the new gates as well. So I think that holding off for a year is probably a good thing since we just went up 30% increase starting July 1 of this year.
But it might be pointed out that
Yes.
our rates here are significantly below public pricing rates for similar facilities like
Yes.
50 or 60%.
Yes, they are. So
So
there's
it
still
is an area that probably next year rates should go up.
Yes, and the difficulty is that we don't have, the challenge is we have less than 10% availability for owners to actually utilize because we just don't have the space to add more RVs. And so it's definitely a premium. There is the wait lists are very long on some of these individual spots.
renewal dates are all the same?
Yes, they're all the same now, July through June. So that was one of the biggest key changes is in the past, everybody was on their own individual
Is
12-month
is that,
calendar.
is that published now, the rate that's gonna be effective in July 1st of next year?
No, the July 1st of this year, this year, 2021 runs through June 30th of next year. We're not planning any change.
Yeah, but
for
you got
2022.
2022 to 2023 proposed.
Right, but no plan change.
Yeah,
So,
I
right,
know.
yeah, that'll be,
Maybe
yes.
we should.
Yeah, that's my point, is
Right.
that I think we ought to relook at that before July 1st.
Okay,
All right?
sure. I mean, that's
Because
very
of the,
good.
because of that 60% discount. from
Right.
public
It
prices.
is a benefit that we have here, though. A lot of people like, I think we should think about that.
But the
too.
same argument as the MNPP card.
I know, but we decided not to.
You're getting a superb deal, and there are other people standing in line that are willing to pay more to take that slot if they're not willing. to pay.
Yeah, I mean, that's one where increasing the rate is not gonna result in a decrease in revenue.
Oh, no, I mean, you have people in the wings, deep in the wing waiting.
There
for
is not,
space.
so I think, as long as that's not published to the
It's not right
rentals
now, right.
at this point in time, that should undergo further discussion.
Sure, we can definitely bring that back to the model worker.
Chief, I didn't know you could rent Cardinal Landing. That's pretty
You
cool.
can, but it's very limited. We allow for about a 20-minute time frame, and they charge, it's basically like wedding photos.
Oh, yeah. I've
And
seen
that's
it.
all we do.
Yeah,
So-
very cool.
Yes.
On a related note, though, the roads at the top of Lava View this summer or last summer, can't remember which. And they rent out the parking lot up there to events. Has there been any talk of other things renting out Cardinal Landing for?
No, because one of the reason behind that is, they're talking about a sensitive subject. The owners that live on Goldfinch and right around Cardinal Landing are very opposed to any, that's why we added new signs for the watercraft rule that we added. So no egress and access to there, to get watercraft out of the river. Because of what's happened in the past, there's been a lot of people that thought they could access that section of the river and they can't. So no, I will say though, that, the Forest Service on the other side of the river, they've greatly enhanced, they've added those new Sun River mountain biking trails, so there's definitely more activity down there. But the difficulty is because it's a gated road and it's on one way in, one way out. It's hard to do anything else down there event wise without disrupting the neighbors that are there and the owners.
So if I take a picture of my grandson on Cardinal Bridge, I owe you $25.
Only if you want us to block the road for you instead of,
Block it so no one else. can use
exactly,
it.
no one else can use it while you're using it. That's the idea behind it. So that covers the fees for services. If you all have any other questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah, I think, just one general comment real quickly. One of the things we need to look at, I mean, there's a lot of places where you had no price increase in there. We are entering into an economic cycle where inflation is on the increase. I think one of the things to keep in mind is from a macroeconomic, when we're thinking about these rates, think about what's happening macroeconomically. And those are the times where the acceptance of increases is much higher. And so you need to think about that, certainly for next year, because this economic cycle is probably going to last well into 2022. To think about that and says, okay, we're in a period of inflation. We ought to take a look at the rates and make adjustments appropriately.
One thing we did discuss during the mission model work group was the fact that because we have not been fully open the last 2 years in most of our recreation amenities, is that it was a little hard to justify making wholesale changes across the entire board because people haven't had the access. So once our goal is to get back to a 7-day week operation, and once if we can attain that next year, then I think the appetite for increasing those fees is much easier.
Yeah.
Those are good points. That's in the context of the last 2 years. This is in the context of now.
Yes.
Going forward.
Yeah,
Right, it's two different approaches. Yes, you're right.
All right, anything further? Moving along. James, we need to make any adjustments in our agenda?
We can, you guys want to? Okay, let's get
I
through.
can be quick.
Let's get through the master.
We
can be as quick as you'll let me be. I'll be as quick as you can let me be.
Yeah, I'm worried about that.
Yes, yes.
Will you be ready after this?
Very apt. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay. So pathway master plan, this is really more of an update than a new master plan. So there was one that was done in 2011. There was one that was done way back in 19 something, 2011 and 2013. 98% of Sun River is built out, and really the only major new amenity that we're looking at is the shark. You could also say river access may be one of those amenities. So with that update, here's some of the key information from the sources, the past ones that I mentioned. We also had a safety group that reviewed all the pathways, which is the fire department, police department, and some concerned owners. And that was probably around 2015-ish. Herb Dix, I don't know if everybody here, if anybody here knows Herb Dix, but oh my goodness, his fingerprints are all over Sun River. He has really just done a masterful job. He has since left Sun River, but he has provided so much information for this pathway master plan. From there, we gave it over to Century West Engineering, Tom Headley, awesome engineer. He has reviewed it. Then staff has reviewed it, and that brings us to where we are now. So there's the key pieces of information. The major changes that have happened in this is it's broken into 5 regions instead of just one big map. In those 5 regions, there's a summary of each region, and also the map shows current conditions and proposed changes. So it helps make it into more of a bite size. And then there's the tunnel information. So if you've got all the information that was provided on this, I'm sorry for making your board books that much bigger, but there's a ton in there. And then I appreciate it. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's very well done.
It's a lot of information. I definitely won't go through page by page.
Yeah, I think the only real question in my mind says, this is great, but what's the implementation plan?
Let me get there. So then the removal of the promenade was also one of the things that was one of the major changes. It used to be in there. It was an IAMP plan. That was a whole walkway that went from the shark to the village to the resort. That's sands now. So we're basically looking at continuing our current pathway system. So that was removed from it. And then the priorities, mostly driven by health and safety, and as I've learned, also driven by the board. So the number one one they have coming through is the Mary McCallum. So we have that loop that's going to be going in this year. We have Meadow Road, the pathways that are, so when Meadow Road was developed, all the paths go kind of behind the houses versus in the front. So we need to have a lot of people walking on Meadow Road, health and safety, have some of that on Ponderosa, a few other places, but Meadow's the one with the police that we noticed the most of, so that's identified. And then forever, the pathway between 2 and 3 has been on here. It's a major challenge with who owns land and where we don't own land. We have a golf course that we're going over. It's got a few things in there, but we have it identified in this. Also the long-term planning and the funding planning to look at how we could address this. It might be a bridge. We're looking at some different options there. And then the next steps, there's a pathway master plan that may have some impact on this. So something to take a look at, and we'll tie that together. None of this plan isn't stagnant. It will continue to change as new amenities come, new boards come, as priorities change. And then the next steps that we have for this is the reports obviously submitted for both the tunnels and the pathway master plan to the board today. We will update all the information on CAD. Right now, we have it in kind of an archaic CAD format. So if you look at it, it has like some of the road names out kind of the way they should be. There could be upside down or sideways. We're going to get that cleaned up, all the distances and everything else cleaned up. That's the next step. And then we were just going to ask for the board to approve it, but I think it was really brought up that it should be reviewed by the community. And this is our number one amenity that we have in Sun River. So fully support it. Becky's the one that brought it up. I think it was a great idea. So we'll go from here, get the information together in CAD format, clean it up a little bit more. Then it's going to be in the scene as far as where to access the information will be online. And then we'll have maybe an open house, or we'll have a certain time period that the owners will have to review and make comment. Then we'll take those reviews and comments, work with staff and probably with some of the board members to identify with the value of which comments have associated with it. And if we start to see multiple on particular areas, we'll incorporate those. And then we'll prepare the document for the board to revise and then hopefully adopt. Probably that in about 2 months.
Terrific.
I do have Yes, a thought or two. We had a chance to speak earlier. I've ridden I think every inch of the bike paths here. I used to race bicycles and I love it here. I've studded tires like you in the wintertime, so I do it year round. Except for my first year here with 30 feet of snow. That was pretty crazy. There's a, and we can talk about this later, but there's a few corners out by the river that are very dangerous, and I can identify those and talk about those.
Be happy to sit down with you and talk about.
And then in regard to the creation of new bike paths, has there been discussion of slightly elevating them? Because we have bike paths, particularly in the winter time, where standing water turns to ice. And if they were designed just slightly different, as in slightly raised, we could get rid of a lot of that. It'd be also much more comfortable. Is that part of an ongoing plan of our bike paths to make them safer, more enjoyable?
No, we're not gonna make them safer and more enjoyable.
That's on record.
No, what we do is we basically rebuilt the entire bike system program, and then we're into a long-term maintenance strategy. When we do have sections that we're gonna rebuild, we'll definitely take that into place and we'll put those in. There's also a signing strategy as far as for some of those corners in the areas you talked about. And in some areas, you'll see where it says keep right, and you'll see that. We're gonna add more of those as we come along. There's a super steep section, if you're familiar with it, like Fort Rock on that pathway there. So we probably need some signing and stuff associated. We take all the input that's provided and take a look at it. And you guys are out there on a daily basis. You see it definitely more than I do if you're riding it that often. And anything that you see, please provide and we'll take a look at it.
No speed bumps on that hill going down.
Get your attention.
Nothing, probably not everybody knows, we have about 34 miles of pathway here. We do leave one section that we always get phone calls about not getting taken care of, and that's out by the Sky Park. And there's a 3 or 4 mile loop right there that basically we don't plow because we get so many requests for people to have a section that they can actually go cross-country skiing on. So that section is left for cross-country skiers.
Golf courses are for.
There you go. And so that is the one section of bike paths that we don't plow. And we plow all bike paths whenever we get 3 or so inches of snow. So it's a constant ongoing. We have 2 or 3 guys that are dedicated to just bike paths. On a snow event, they work 12-hour days to try to keep up on it.
Part of that reason, Mark, is because that's our transportation hub for pedestrians and bicyclists, right?
I can tell you, it's when you're plowing at 2 o'clock in the morning, the snow's going like crazy, and then you see people cross-country skiing on the road when you're driving a huge truck around a corner. It can be very unnerving, you might say, for both the person driving and for the person with the cross-country skis. So we're really trying to keep people off of that. And the only sections that we have the limitations for right now are, as I mentioned before, the 2 to 3, Meadow Drive. We have some sections around Ponderosa too. And when Sun River was originally built with the pathways, they were supposed to be for golf carts, not actually for pathways. And that's why Meadow was that way, so you could access everything through the golf carts in the back of the houses. So that's a change that will need to take place, is to move those out to the edge of the road and keep them safer in the future. But as far as funding, that's something we'll probably be coming forward in future years to identify sections. This next year, we have that non-paved that we're going to be doing out at Mary McCallum. That we have immediate, and then the tunnel, which we already talked about, is going to be the Fort Rock tunnel. And that should be in the spring.
And there's no plan to expand the bike path along the river north, somewhat parallel to Kinglet.
There is actually a section that brings part of that bike path all the way over to the river access, the owner's river access. And that section would probably be a raised pathway because we have some wetlands in that area. And that, but as far as tying recreation opportunities together, it'd be wonderful. Have quite a pushback from people who have houses, of course. But every time we put in a pathway, we have a huge amount of pushback. But as soon as it's in, and so number one menu, they're listing their house adjacent to some of the pathways, right? And so it's a constant challenge when you're looking at proposing new. You definitely have pushback, and there's a good section of that is off on Fort Rock again. There was a section of pathway that was looking to tie that into the Shark, and we had
some pushback on that. I think those people may have moved on, but having that tie would really help Sun River. There's also 2 additional tunnels that were proposed in this that weren't before, and there's 3 tunnels that are looking to be removed on this plan.
Where's Chuck's tunnel?
Chucky's?
Yeah.
So right there by the village, the one that goes.
Dr. Stoddard's
Right.
office.
Is there a tunnel there?
There is, yeah.
Really?
It's, so.
I've never seen
The one
that.
right by the bike,
Bike-
It goes, goes underneath the road.
Four
behind
Seasons.
the
Four
shop.
Seasons or
Yeah.
Chucky's.
Oh, it's behind it. Oh, okay. I
It doesn't go
was-
in.
Yeah, I was
kinda
thinking it was
going
supposed to
away.
be.
There's
No, that's
different
on the road,
options.
so
It
that's
doesn't
very-
access
Okay, all right.
hardly anything from there versus where the new roundabouts are. So there's a
It
different.
goes to the bike path on the other side where you can go
Right.
out to
Yeah.
the main entrance, or you can go out past Sharp.
Right, but if you go down 100 yards, not even that far, you're on a place where you're able to cross. When you're looking at the cost associated with it, that thing's really limited by land. When you start looking at changing the bike paths and having the land associated with it. Just, I don't know if everybody here is familiar with why we're looking at the tunnels so much, and I'll just cover that real quick, is when it rains or snows and all of that precip comes into the tunnel and then it freezes, we'll have ice sometimes that thick, sometimes that thick. Our guys actually go out there with jackhammers, jackhammer out all the ice, carry it out. But even if it gets in there that thick and it freezes up and you're going through it, whew, so it's a major safety concern. And also some of the things going into there, like the one at Chucky's, there is about a 20-something% on both sides.
Yeah,
coming in
it
out of
is.
that one. So super steep. But those are the proposals. These are drafts, looking for input, and we'll have it up on our website. I don't know if it'll be generated just for itself website, but we'll take a look at that. And we'll tie to this with input for the next couple of months before we come back to the board for evaluation and adoption.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is a very important community. One of the best things about Sun River, from my perspective. All right. James?
The legal portion of this is going to be in executive session. So the legal training that Bert and Josh and Sarah are going to provide are going to be executive session. So, and they can wait until the end. These next 2 items, Josh let me know that they're good until the end. Also that they're operating under the flat fee that we pay them. Not that we'll take extra long on these next.
And our
items,
meeting is
but-
so interesting.
So, yeah, and we only have a couple more items before we get to this, to the
We're
executive
we're
session.
moving right along.
Yeah.
Indeed. All right, the SROA, SSB, rules enforcement follow-up.
Yes, and for board's information, at the end of the summer, as we get into the fall every year, the SSD and SROA staff get together, we meet and we discuss what happened in the summer. And present at the last meeting, we had Director Mobley, Director Gillies, we had Joe Zucker, our magistrate. Pat Hensley was a representative from the Covenants Committee, our Rules Committee. Myself, Patty Gentilomo, we had Bill Hepburn and John Ralston from the SSD board, Debbie Baker and Chief Moore and Chief Darling were all in attendance. And so in short, what we looked at is the activities in Sun River over the past year, and were there, what did we experience? Essentially looking at the need for new rules or amended rules or rules documents. But backing up, if all of you remember, we had our rules awareness and compliance task force that we worked with this past year, last winter, and we put a lot of new rules into place. We put a branding program in place for advertising our rules. We worked with property management companies. We worked with police and fire. We had a nuisance property rule that was put into place. We have a database that can track all of those rules violations per property. We had a notification for property owners on violations on their property. We had a new rule regarding loading, unloading watercraft to take care of the issues, to address the issues at Cardinal Landing Bridge that we heard about. And we had changes regarding the penalty for fireworks. In short, in the meeting, and Director Gillies and Mobley chime in if you would like. was that the result of all of that had a very positive effect on reducing the number of violations, rules violations, and just overall livability in Sun River this past year. That's not to say that all violations went away. They will never all go away. That's not realistic. But all of those in combination had a very positive effect. So going through these, we address these in different ways. We had some general comments. We addressed pathways, we addressed river access, and then we addressed fire issues. And we came up with a list of tasks that came out of that meeting. But in short, we all acknowledged that with regard to the pathways, the pathway use has been busier just by virtue of so many people in Sun River. There were questions and comments about how should we put a speed limit in place on the pathways. Chief Darling commented that that's almost an impossibility to monitor. Nobody has speed limits or speedometers on their bike, and they don't have the capability of measuring speeds. It would just be very difficult. Comment was also, well, maybe we adopt a rule or we just put up signs that will still have the effect for those people that abide by rules will slow down. Chief Moore also commented that, it's really dependent. You could have a slow time of the year when 25 or 30 miles an hour is fine on the pathways. You could have a busy time of the year where 10 and 15 miles per hour is not so safe on the pathways. So it's really on the pathway use, it really comes back to kind of two things. One, continuing our education and our requests through the property management companies, through the bike companies, to have people follow the basic rule of, giving an audible signal when you're passing somebody and just slowing down on the pathways. And again, overall, it seemed to have a positive effect this year. But again, as the popularity of Sun River grows and the pathways, as we just heard, grows, there's going to continue to be conflicts. I look, down the road, if that continues to grow, who knows? Do we do something such as find sections, and it's not in our pathway master plan, but Mark and I discussed this. Potentially there are sections of the pathways that are so busy that we need to build separate pedestrian and bicycle pathways. But again, that's way on down the road. I don't want to get back into the reserve budget.
I mean, one of the big issues that, if you follow you read the letters to the editor and the Ben Bulletin over the last 2 weeks, there was a lot of discussion about e-bikes. And I think, we've experienced some of this past summer. We're going to experience a lot more of that going forward. That's going to become a much, much bigger issue. And, the differentiation between the class 1, class 2 is almost impossible for anybody to figure out. And so we're in a situation, and it's not just e-bikes, it's, e-scooters and e-surfboards, and I don't know what they're all called, but they have multiple different things that are self-propelled now that, are going to be prevalent on our pathways going forward.
Well, and that was this,
and dogs with not on leashes.
so that was the next part of the discussion regarding pathways, was that very thing. We discussed that it's very difficult for the bike patrol to differentiate between class 1 and class 2. And I have read some articles too that essentially in the next few years, people that are buying bikes bikes are not cheap. They're going to end up with some form of e-bike.
Yeah.
And that it's going to continue to be an issue that's going to come to this board, as you've heard from some residents over the past year. So again, it's very difficult right now. It's hard for the bike patrol to enforce. And I mean, with the volume of people on the pathways, it will be impossible for them to enforce, is essentially what Chief Darling told us. And that you're going to get, unless we address it in a fashion, in a rule, that you're going to continue to have people come here and say, we should allow them, and other people saying, they're not allowed, why are you not enforcing it? It's going to grow. With regard to river access,
James,
yes.
Following up on what Gerhardt's saying, I'm noticing more groups on the single wheelers, self-propelled. They advertise as the XR model is for shredding. You can enjoy the scent of pine trees. They go 16 or 19 miles an hour. When you see these guys, they're kitted up. With all the padding and helmets and all of that sort of stuff. And it's a perfect place for a group of these people to come. They cost between $2,000 and $4,000. People have made it an investment.
Yeah.
Same thing with the electric scooters. Now we can identify those two types.
Yeah, they
of
don't have
motorized.
pedals. Sure.
So that in my opinion can be enforced. Additionally, e-bikes are going to be getting cheaper.
Yeah.
Probably because of federal legislation, HR 1019, which single filers will be able to take advantage of a tax credit once every 3 years for their purchase, up to 30%. So bikes going to be getting cheaper, assuming that this federal bill goes through.
Well, and again, our pathways, if you remember, our pathways are not purely recreational pathways. They are a transportation component through Sun River. And that's why we have a pathway master plan. That's why we have 34 miles of pathway. We do not allow pedestrians and bicycles on our streets. And, there's a requirement that that essentially you have to provide for all modes of transportation. And what I mean modes is pedestrian, bicycles, and automobiles. And so, but therefore, what you're talking about, those can be regulated. And we see those, but the real issue is the class 1 and class 2 bikes is what we see. And currently we allow class 1, but not class 2. And I think that's what's going to continue to come to a head over the course of the next year.
And another area on the rules enforcement, I think one of the other things with bicyclists that we see on the pathways is as a walker on the pathways, I would say the number of bikers that announce they're coming and passing you is more like 10 to 15% of bicyclists. They don't give the common courtesy, say passing on your left. And I try to make a comment as they're passing on the left. I just say passing on the left to try to encourage them. But I think it's at times it's 10% of the bicyclists.
I'm not quite as nice. I say, thanks for the warning.
Oh, there you go. I had proposed in the governance committee a possible ring your bell campaign.
Yeah.
Where you can hear that from far back. I say on your left, I end up saying it 3 times sometimes because they just don't hear me. And I don't want to yell at the person. But having a bell campaign, I think that could go a long way, provided it's the right tone. You don't want this shrill, horrible tone throughout Sun River, as well as how loud it is. They make different ones that we could.
Or the wrong frequency for those of us.
Yeah.
I constantly say on my life, on your left, but I'm not gonna get bell, Paul.
No,
I'm sorry. Not gonna- trying to navigate this and this and.
Well, you just shouldn't be on your cell phone.
I am never on my cell phone.
I use a bell and the bell works very well.
Yeah, it's universal.
It's much better than passing on.
Well, even too, oftentimes in the summertime, we have a lot of different languages. I don't know how many people are fluent in English on your left, as that might mean nothing to them, but a bell would mean something.
Yeah, but the other part of it is that there are pedestrians, particularly in the summertime, where there's a group of them, maybe 3 or 4, and they want to walk side by side.
Yeah.
By side.
Yeah, and I've even come up against a group that's walking towards me, and I'm on my bicycle, and they keep walking towards me. I'm ringing my bell, and they keep walking towards me, and finally I have to stop my bicycles, and they said, "Oh."
Well, and I've been on saying on your left, and they say, "Oh, go to the left." And so, go to the left. If you're ringing a bell, it's like, okay, ding-a-ling behind me, but does that mean left, right, center? And sometimes people, you just have to kind of go slow and navigate it. I don't know.
But
We're gonna constantly.
that's a
We can talk
constant
about this
issue.
all day.
Yeah.
I think we're going to.
Politeness and courtesy.
It is, and that's
We got to
something.
try to reinforce that in our various
But
marketing.
again, I mean, through all of the documents that Susan had put together over this past year, we have the basic bicycle etiquette while on our pathways. So we have it on our maps. We have that in the scene a few times a year. We have it on signs. I mean, so again, it's one of those things, we continually try to educate folks and request that, but we're always going to get that degree of folks that just will not do it. And again, that's something as a rule, it would be impossible to win.
Right.
So again, I think a lot of this, that what I'm going to discuss today is that continual education that we do through a variety of means. So the next issue though was river access and use. You heard a lot about that earlier this year. There was the rule that was put into place regarding or prohibiting loading, unloading of watercraft from the streets in Sun River. That overall has had a positive effect. The biggest the biggest area where we've had issues was around Cardinal Landing Bridge. Early in the year, I got a few complaints, but in working with the police, they pretty much had a constant presence there at Cardinal Landing Bridge. And once we got to, I would say, early June, the number of complaints that I've gotten personally that came into our office basically went away. But again, we had signs all over. We've experienced less of that. I think some of it due to the signs and the education that we did. But I think, and I believe, without a constant presence at Cardinal Landing Bridge, the signs keep the honest people honest. There will continually be people that want to test that rule. So it's something in working with the police department, we have a contract with them for bike patrol. We may have to revisit that, looking at, do we need to work with them for a constant presence at the Cardinal Landing Bridge or other areas where we have this issue. So again, it will be continual education through all of our various things to let folks know that they cannot load, unload from the streets. Now, on a separate note, we discussed this earlier this year when we were revising the rule or creating the new rule, is that from the common areas, people can exit the river and ingress, egress the river from the common areas with their watercraft, with their floaties, with their kayak, whatever it may be. And again, you heard some comments from John Ralston, who was an owner earlier this year when we were considering saying no access from the common areas. And again, going back to the intent of why the common areas were created as part of the original Sun River Master Plan, it was so that folks had access to the river. So that was something the board, you did not impose that rule. You did not say no access. So that's just kind of a reminder. The police are aware of that. People still make complaints, but that is something that is allowed in Sun River. But once you get out of the river with your floaties, you just can't load them into your car. You might have to walk along the way. So that rule, I guess what I'm saying is the rule, loading, unloading from the roads, really reduce the number of people getting in and out of the river on the common areas. One of the items that came out of that discussion too was to a task going forward, continue for myself and probably Chief Darling to have a discussion with the county. If you remember this time last year, you had a joint meeting with the Deschutes County Commissioners and the Harbor Bridge issue came up. And it was discussed that, they have safety concerns about folks getting in and out of the river, Harbor Bridge, parking, et cetera. But kind of ignoring on the down that we're the receiving end of that, of the folks getting out of the river. So the recommendation was to continue conversations with the county about us working with the Forest Service to enhance opportunities on the other side of the river. You now have on the other side of Cardinal Landing Bridge, you actually have vehicular access that's pretty good coming down into there. But again, the county had discussed, the commissioners told you, they had started talking about this about 10 years ago, and when they were told it would be a 10-year process to get all the permits and get all this in place. So the issue is, had they started 10 years ago, we may have had a solution. So no time like the present, there'll be conversations with the county to bring that up again with the Forest Service. And then with regards to fire, Chief Moore said the rules we have in place right now are working very well. We had no instances this year with fireworks in Sun River. Part of that was on the ban countywide. He appreciated clarity on what we allow and don't allow for fires, fire pits at people's houses. Essentially, we clarified what our rule is. And the flame either has to be entirely enclosed by glass and you're only allowed propane, or those heaters that have the really tall, small perforations, such as those with the dome on the top. Those are the only two type of flames that you're allowed, heaters that you're allowed. His big issue was the firewood, and the covenants committee is going to be further addressing the amount of firewood that you're allowed on the property. It's actually part of the design manual, which seems weird. So it's going to get plucked out of the design manual and go back to the covenants committee. And essentially what they're talking about is reducing from 5 cords of wood down to something like 2 cords of wood for firewood, and then the location. So again, that will be forthcoming in the covenants committee.
That needs to be, I think that's great, but that has to be done relatively soon because, people are still adding to their pile. And, you're gonna have a real hard time convincing people that they need to take 5 cords of wood that are currently on their lot and shipping them off somewhere else because now the rule has changed. And so we really need to start letting people know up in advance. It says, okay, the amount of wood that you're going to be able to store on your lot is going to go down.
It's going to go to the covenants committee discussion in December. So at the next meeting, because when we adopt the new design manual, that's going to come out. That'll be right after the first of the year. And so there's a bunch of things that are coming out of the design manual that are on the plate of the covenants committee for how they get inserted in our rules. We've had Patty Smith attend to the last task force meeting. She's the chair of the covenants committee. So it's happening really soon.
Okay.
And then I think as part of that too, there are a variety of, there's a lot of old wood that just really, it won't even burn anymore, that needs to go away. So that will be up to owners to figure that out. But there's also, we know of 2 different, they're churches, organizations that come and pick up your wood that you can donate it and then we'll come pick it up.
Okay.
So
I mean, what's the rationale from going from 5 to 2 though?
Reduce fire danger on your property. And the fact that what folks are, many of the, again, there's so much old wood that what has happened is folks are using those to build fences. And we also have that rule. And that really that with the houses that are being built today is you don't really see so many wood burning stoves or wood burning fireplaces to the point where people need 5 cords. And so that was the discussion.
I kind of heat my house with wood, and I've got a wood stove. And if you cut it down this year, it's not seasoned. It's got to sit for a year actually to be seasoned before it's well usable. And we're frankly allowed 5 cords with our permits as owners, right, to go over to Public Works and pick up wood. If I only had 2 cords throughout the year, I'd probably run out as soon as it starts snowing.
Well, it's going to be, that's part of the discussion in front of the covenants. Yeah. So, but that issue's been brought to them from the fire reduction standpoint in Sun River. And it's something, and the last thing was Chief Moore noted the work that was begun, then we had fire season, and now it's begun again on revising our ladder fuel reduction plan that will be completed this winter, and Patty's working on that. So all those components are kind of work together. And then the tasks that came out of this were, again, joint requests from SRO and SSD to work with Deschutes County and the Forest Service regarding a boat landing on the Forest Service side of the river. And again, that the SROA, the police department, fire department had follow-up meeting with property managers regarding their continued assistance for rural education. And to that regard, again, if you remember our rural awareness and education task force that we had, there's a meeting in 2 weeks of that committee, kind of as the same follow-up that they put to engage that task force, which has property managers involved in it. So I anticipate, at that meeting, telling property managers, thank you for your help. They really did help us. And we want you to keep it up. And here's some additional things we want some help with. For example, we were talking during the break, like, can they let their renters know, please put lights on your bike, things like that. And then there was the suggestion of, could we pursue the possibility of conducting bike and pedestrian counts on the pathways? We can do that. I talked with the traffic engineer and it is possible to be done. What that would do is it would give us a base level of information throughout the year, how busy our pathways are. And I think more importantly, it will tell us which sections of our pathways are busiest with pedestrians and bikes. Because again, as we get busier and busier, we look at things like the pathway master plan. Do we get to a point where we need to separate pedestrians and bicycles for safety reasons? And having that information will let us know, okay, what's your busiest sections where you can get the biggest bang for your buck? Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, the top level view is pretty obvious. It's around the village.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, you don't have to bicycle too much on the pathways to know that around the village is where the problem usually are.
Yeah. And so then, so overall, bringing this to conclusion, you know, kind of the general comments that really came out of this was there weren't really a lot of rule changes that were necessary. It was to continue the education components that we did this past year. The nuisance property rule that we had did not have to be implemented. There were no properties that exceeded that threshold where the owner was given a citation for being a nuisance property. And part of that goes back to the police department, property managers, and the owners. They're being notified when something was happening on their property, and they didn't want to get to that point, so they addressed the issues. And again, on the back end, I know that I got far fewer complaints this year than I did last year in that regard. And then just overall, the police, you know, they experienced difficulty hiring bike patrol this past year, and they were not fully staffed at any point this year. So again, we rely on them for enforcement. They were experiencing the same things that we have in many other employers. So going forward, it's going to, what I've learned in my time here in 2 summers, this is a continual work in process. It's a continued monitoring what we need to do to educate owners, visitors to Sun River, and continually find creative ways to let people know, here are the rules and you need to abide by the rules.
James, do you know the status of the proposed bike path from Bend to Wildwood View?
You know, I don't. There was something just in the bulletin the other day, and I glanced at it, but I didn't read it, so I don't know exactly what the status is.
That could affect us.
I think they're looking to start that in 2023. Yeah, is what I've heard. At least portions of it.
They were still in the, I think, environmental analysis. There's a, you know, when you get on federal land.
Study, right?
Yeah,
They keep creating.
and that's what I keep, yeah.
The new apartment.
James, one thing that came up
Yeah,
in
I
that
know.
meeting was the
Yes.
whole dog leash
Yeah.
thing. Are they
Oh.
attacking that or?
Yeah, and it's actually going to be back to, well, it's going to be before you. Let's see. I don't know if we put it on. I think in December, we're going to put it on your agenda for December. Covenants Committee came forward with a proposal for dogs on leash on the pathways. So that's going to be before you, and with some specific parameters about leashes no
Wait till
longer
you're
than
taken
6
down by
feet, et cetera, et cetera. You know, they didn't modify it by time of year, maybe during the busy times of year. So, you know, that's all within the purview of the board to say, okay, we like that rule, we don't like that rule, or we like it, but we want to modify it. But again, I mean, what you could do is come to you in December. You could do a first reading, put it out there for public comment, just like you did for the class 2 e-bikes, and you got a lot of comment and input, and then that never went forward. So you have that opportunity.
Is that just bike pathways or is it golf pathways? as well?
Just SROA pathways. We don't have the jurisdiction over the pathways on the car.
And by a capable owner too.
Yeah,
That's
and a
a-
capable owner.
There's lots of things that need to be discussed about that.
Yeah.
I'll put a helmet on.
So that kind of, it was the update.
All right. Are you ready then to talk about
Yes.
the management agreement?
Yeah, real quick, what's in your book is there is a management agreement between SROA, the SSD, and Deschutes County. And we're, but most of the agreement gets at the operation of the SSD and the relationship with county. SROA is included in this. SSD, as you all know, going back early 2000s, was, part of, police and fire were part of SROA. But essentially, this was these proposed changes. The changes are in red and then also highlighted in yellow and strike through. Were proposed by the SSD. I don't know if all of you know or remember, but the covenants, or not the covenants committee, our nominating committee is responsible for the nominations of new members to the SSD board. So it is our nominating committee. And what the, and I have copies of the charter of the covenants committee if you would like those. But essentially, it spells out what the nominating committee considers, what their thought processes are, et cetera, when nominating members to the SSD board. What the SSD would like is that if there are any changes to, this is the biggest change in here, if there are any changes to the nominating committee charter that affect the suggestions or the appointments to the SSD board, they would like to know what are you looking at changing in the nominating committee charter that essentially could affect what is considered for potential candidates to the SSD board. So they're not saying anything in particular, but the actual language says what they want added is the district will be advised of and allowed input in any proposed changes to the association nominating committee charter as it relates to the processes impacting the solicitation, vetting, and recommendation of SSD directors. There is a section in the existing nominating committee charter, section 2, that discusses what will be taken into consideration by the nominating committee when they're considering candidates for the SSD board. And here, I'll just pass it out to you. And it's section 2. All they're saying is if we make changes to that, they want to see what changes we're making and be able to comment. That's it. The other proposed change is that they want to clarify with regard to terms. What they said is essentially there's no more than 2 terms, and they said a member shall serve for no more than 2 consecutive full terms. And the new language says partial terms are not counted as part of the 2 consecutive terms. So that if you were appointed midterm, you can fulfill that term, and then you can have 2 more terms on the SSD board. And then the only other change had to do with administration, and it was some strike through language. It's really just cleanup language, and that's in section 6 of that operating agreement. So those were the 3 major changes. The 4th one had to do with budgeting, and what they were proposing is that when they create their budget, there was a provision in here that says the SSD budget shall also be provided to the association for its review. And so effectively what they're wanting to do is take out that provision that would not allow SROA to review their budget.
Well, I mean, I think there's nothing stating that you can't review it. It's just that you don't have any input on it. So,
Exactly.
other than the 2 board members that.
It's not a given that they automatically have to give it to us
Right, yeah.
to comment on.
But the 2 board members have access to that information.
Exactly, and that's kind of.
Yeah.
So those are the proposed changes. I met with Debbie Baker on these. She explained them to me. We talked about the pros and cons. The biggest one that I saw had to do with the nominating committee charter. And essentially, they're not saying they want anything in there. They just want to know if we're changing how they're, because SROA gets to appoint or recommend appointments to their board. What they're saying is, if you're going to change something about how you recommend appointments to our board, please let us comment on that before you do so. I think that's
a reasonable request.
I think it's perfectly reasonable.
Communication has been a challenge in the past. Yeah.
So this would be an action item tomorrow. And then what would happen? So the action item is for the board to authorize, be okay with these and authorize the board president to sign this agreement in the future when it's finalized. And again, it'll go to the county and SSD approval as well.
Are you going to prepare the language There's no sheet in here for.
Yeah, I'll prepare you a motion for you to do so. Yeah.
All right. Review board agenda. Tomorrow. Any questions, comments, concerns about what is before you on the next page? It will soon be here. We have-
I like the optimism on the timing.
There is some optimism expressed there.
Of late, the meetings have run a bit. This guy's tough. He's tough.
Yeah. Let's not vote. All right. Then other business? Hearing none.
You want to do the legal training or the executive session?
Well, it's going to be an executive session.
Going to do.
They're both in executive.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we are ready for you.
I, Director Marie, move to recess the public meeting and adjourn into executive session under the authority given in the Summary Bylaws, Article 4, Section 10, to discuss contractual, personnel, and legal matters that may be subject to appointment.
And a second. Bert? All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. No abstentions.